Welcome. Take a slow breath. Let the day settle around you, like soft dust drifting to the floor of a forgotten room. You're here now, where time dosing, tea press, and the present world fades gently into the distance. Tonight, we'll drift back to a moment in American history heavy with hope, hardship, and the shimmering promise of gold, to the year 1849, and the steep, wind-blown hills of a rough settlement that would soon become San Francisco. But the truth beneath it is quieter. Not a story of instant riches and adventure, but one of grit, damp boots, makeshift homes, and long days in cold creeks that gave very little back. Close your eyes, if you like, and picture the coast. It's early morning. The fog is still curled around the edge of the bay. Wooden ships crowd the harbor, many abandoned by crews who ran for the hills at the first rumor of gold. Their masts creak in the breeze. The scent of tar, wet rope, and salt air mingles with the heavy sweetness of wood smoke drifting from campfires up on the hill. You walk slowly along a plank path laid over mud boots, squelching with every step. Around you, voices murmur in dozens of languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, German, men and women from every corner of the world, drawn by a single glimmering dream. Their words blur into one another, like the soft rustle of river water over stone. You are safe here. You are far away from the present. You are not expected to remember, only to imagine. And yet, this world was very real, carved by real hands, and lived by people whose names you will not find in textbooks. It's easy to remember the few who succeeded, those whose lucky strikes bought land, built banks, or started cities. But behind each of those stories were thousands who did not strike it rich, who barely struck anything at all. They arrived with calloused hands and hopeful hearts. They slept in shacks made from flattened crates, ate beans from dented tins, and paid $1 for a single egg, if they could find one. They carried pans and picks, and the weight of dreams that grew heavier with each passing day. Some had never left their hometowns before. Others had crossed oceans, deserts, and jungles to get here. They were not trained miners. They were butchers, barbers, farmers, and carpenters, transformed by hope into prospectors. And they found, not gold, but mud, cold water, and disappointment. That is the world we'll wander through tonight. Not one of dramatic gunfights or heroic victories, but of slow persistence, of living one long day at a time. Because history is not always written in bold headlines. Sometimes, it lingers in tin plates, worn boots, and empty pans. In the quiet stories, the forgotten, the ordinary, we find the rhythm of real lives. And as you listen, you may feel that contrast. Your warm bed, your quiet room, food waiting in your kitchen, steady work, a place to return to each night. All things that many of these men lacked. For them, each morning was uncertain, each evening a small survival, and yet they endured. So tonight we'll walk their path, slowly, gently, without urgency or judgment. We'll begin by rising with a miner in the Sierra foothills, cold, tired, and hopeful. We'll spend a day with him as he works the claim, eats what little he can afford, and listens to rumors whispered around the campfire. Later, we'll follow the quiet rise of a clever businessman, a German immigrant who didn't mine for gold, but made something stronger than it. A pair of riveted pants that still bears his name. Then we'll linger among the legends. Tales of gold lost to river floods, to betrayal, or simply to time. And finally, we'll lift our gaze to the drawing rooms and counting houses of the San Francisco elite, to the men in waistcoats and top hats who made fortunes not from digging, but from lending, building, and speculating. But first, before we reach the banks and the legends, we return to the earth, to a shack with thin walls, to a fire burning low, to a man who stirs from sleep, stretches aching limbs, and prepares once more to dig into the cold, indifferent ground. Let's begin. The morning comes quietly. There's no bell, no alarm, just the slow brightening of a gray sky beyond thin walls, and the soft shifting of wind through canvas seams. You stir, already half awake, having slept in a curl against the cold. The air inside your shelter is still and damp. Your breath hangs pale in the space above your face. The roof above you groans gently in the breeze. It's made of mismatched boards and patched tarpaulin, nailed together with whatever scrap could be found. The floor beneath you is earth, uneven and chilled, layered with straw and worn blankets. You sit up slowly, careful of your back, your knees, Every part of you feels it, and the stiffness of another cold night without a fire, the dull ache from yesterday's lifting and hauling, the ever-present soreness in your hands. Your fingers are swollen and cracked, calloused and unclean despite the near-constant contact with water. You reach for your boots. They're cold to the touch. You tucked them beneath your bedroll to keep them from freezing solid, or worse, disappearing. Theft is common here, even among neighbors. Or especially among neighbors. The shack creaks again. From outside, there's the sound of movement. Another miner raking ashes from a dead fire. The metallic clink of a tin cup. The soft murmur of someone clearing their throat. You dress in silence. Wool canvas, flannel, all of it, heavy with moisture and dust. You tie a strip of cloth around your neck, more for habit than warmth, and pull on your hat. The brim is bent, but it still keeps the sun off when the sun comes. There is no mirror, no basin, no reflection to greet you, only the day ahead. Another day in the diggings. And so, you step outside. The morning's chill lingers as you crouch beside the fire pit. The embers are faint. Faint enough to require coaxing, too faint to bother with if you're already late to your claim. You reach into a sack near the door. It's not much of a pantry. Just a stitched cotton bag, worn thin with handling. Inside hardtack. Dense, dry, and cracked at the edges. It was baked weeks ago, maybe longer. You knock it once on the heel of your boot before biting in. Just to check for weevils. There's no point in wasting time with utensils. You chew slowly, not because it's satisfying, but because you have to. There's coffee, too. Or something close. Brewed with water you strain through a bandana, thick with silt and wood ash, boiled in a tin can blackened with soot. It scalds your lip. But the bitterness is familiar now. Almost welcome. It reminds you that you're still here. Still trying. You could buy more. You think about it often. But prices here don't follow any rule you knew before. A single egg costs the same as a day's wage back home. A pound of flour, nearly its weight in silver. Everything has to be hauled in by mule or by ship, and every merchant knows you pay what you must. If you want to eat at all, you trade when you can. A rusted shovel head for a few strips of jerky, a bag of nails for beans. Sometimes, when someone strikes a lucky pan, they buy whiskey and bread for the whole camp, but that's rare. Mostly, it's hardtack coffee. Salt pork, that's more salt than pork. You eat enough to quiet the ache, never enough to be full. And then, you begin the walk to the river. The river waits, always the river. Imagine yourself stepping down a steep, muddy bank. The earth beneath your boots is soft and cold, thick with the damp smell of wet stone and forest debris. Around you, the morning mist still clings to the water's surface, a silvery veil barely disturbed by the faint ripple of the current. The sound is constant, but gentler, soft susurration, like a lullaby for the restless land. It's early spring, or late autumn when the chill is sharpest in these parts. Your breath comes in clouds, drifting into the stillness. Your clothes, already damp from last night's dew, cling coldly to your skin beneath layers of wool and canvas. The ground beneath the river's edge is slick and uneven. You balance carefully. You kneel at the water's edge. Your hands rough and swollen reach into the frigid current. The cold is immediate, a shock that numbs your fingertip. The water seeps into your sleeves, soaking through layers of fabric, chilling you deeper. But the work calls you. There is no time for hesitation. You hold your pan steady, lowering it slowly into the shallow flow. The riverbed is uneven smooth stones, sharp pebbles, and a thin layer of dark, heavy silt. You sweep and tilt the pan with practiced patience, coaxing the gravel and sand to move. Your eyes search the swirling water, looking for the faintest glimmer, the hint of gold flecks, hidden beneath mud and stone. Time stretches long. Your arms tire as the cold settles deeper, climbing from your hands into your elbows and shoulders. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of the water's flow, the steady swish of your pan. The river seems to pulse in harmony with your effort, a quiet companion to your labor. Nearby, others work in similar silence. The clink of tools, the scrape of feet on river rocks, the occasional sigh or gruntle muted beneath the river's endless murmur. Around you, tin shacks lean precariously, smoke curling lazily from chipped chimneys. The scent of damp wood smoke mixes with wet earth and the sharp taps of cold water. There is no grand purpose here, only the patient search, the faint promise of fortune buried deep beneath the river's cold embrace. Each panful is a quiet hope, a whispered possibility that anything might glint in the sediment. The sun climbs slowly, breaking through the mist in soft, pale shafts of light. It warms your back, a gentle reprieve from the chill, but you know the cold will return. The river is relentless. The days are long. Lunch is a brief moment. Beside the water a handful of dried beans, a few bites of salted pork wrapped in coarse cloth. You eat quickly, wary of the cold that creeps in when the body stills. Conversations are sparse. Fatigue and focus weigh heavier than words. After a few hours your muscles ache. Your clothes cling wetter now, the constant contact with the water leaving them sodden. Your boots are heavy with mud, the river's relentless chill seeping into your bones. You pack up your gear slowly, savoring the brief warmth of the sun before the journey back to camp. The path is slippery, the descent cautious. The river's song follows you, a constant reminder of the day's work unrewarded or not. Back in camp, the routine continues. You tend to your tools, sharpen the edges of your pan and shovel, patch worn clothes where you can. The smell of wood smoke grows stronger as fires are stoked for evening meals. You wash your hands in cool water, the dirt ingrained beneath cracked nails a silent testament to the day's labor. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a tin mirror, face lined with dust and weariness, eyes set with quiet resolve. As twilight deepens, the camp settles into stillness. The flicker of lanterns, dancers, behind canvas walls. The river's distant murmur lulls the day toward night, and tomorrow, you will do it all again. As the day's labor slips behind you, imagine yourself stepping away from the relentless river and its cold, steady song. You make your way back to camp, where a cluster of tin shacks and rough tents form a fragile settlement against the vast wilderness. The camp feels like a world apart, a patchwork of hope, hardship, and the quiet hum of survival. The air here is thick with the mingled scents of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint, sour temps of sweat. These smells drift lazily over the uneven ground, mingling with the metallic tang of tools and the faint perfume of overcooked beans simmering over open fires. Your shack, if you're lucky to have one, is no more than a cramped box made of salvaged tin panels. The metal walls are cold to the touch, gleaming dully in the fading light. Inside, the floor is dirt, covered with rough blankets, and the occasional animal pelt scavenged or traded from a passing prospector. The roof creaks softly as the wind moves through gaps, whispering a restless lullaby that seeps into the walls. The light inside is dim, cast by a single flickering lantern that throws long shadows against the tin. You sit quietly, feeling the cool metal under your fingertip, hearing the faint drip of water from last night's rain against the roof. Around you, the camp pulses with low voices and occasional laughter, soft and tired, like the remnants of a dream struggling to hold on. Men gather in small groups, their faces worn and sunburned, eyes heavy with exhaustion and unspoken worries. The chatter is a patchwork of accents and languages, Spanish, Chinese, German, all woven together by a shared pursuit. At times a guitar's faint strum cuts through the air, a solitary tune carried lightly on the breeze. Sometimes, a rough song breaks out, voices joining in with uncertain harmony, a fragile thread of comfort amidst uncertainty. But beneath the camaraderie lies a steady undercurrent of tension. Claim jumpers lurk like shadows in the edges of camp life. You sense their presence not in open conflict, but in whispered rumors and wary glances. The fear that all your day's work might be stolen by a man with a gun and a quick hand hangs like a cold fog. You learn to guard your tools carefully, to mark your claim with stones or makeshift signs, hoping they are enough to keep the peace. Sometimes disputes flare, resolved with harsh words or worse, but mostly they smolder quietly, a slow-burning reminder of the fragile trust that holds this patchwork community together. Evenings are marked by small rituals, a shared meal, stories passed quietly around a fire, a moment to rest and remember the world beyond the hills. You watch as others tend to small gardens or fashion trinkets. Children, if there are any, run through the camp with fleeting bursts of energy, their laughter a rare lightness in the heavy air. You might find yourself listening to an old prospector recount tales of faraway lands, his voice steady and slow, weaving memories like thread through the cool night air, or sitting silently, letting the crackling fire hold your attention, the sparks drifting upwards like tiny stars against the dark sky. Sleep comes in fits, interrupted by cold, hunger, or the distant howl of a coyote, but it comes nonetheless. You pull your blankets tight, listening to the night sounds. The rustle of leaves, the murmur of the river nearby, the occasional murmur of voices fading into quiet. In these moments, despite the hardships, there is a fragile sense of belonging. The camp is a world built on shared struggle, on the hope that tomorrow might bring a little more fortune, a little more ease. And so you rest, gathering strength for the next day's endless rhythm where cold water, hard labor, and distant dreams await. Imagine yourself lying awake in your cramped tin shack, the faint glow of embers from the campfire filtering through the thin metal walls. Outside, the world feels both vast and uncertain. Here, lore is a fragile thread, woven unevenly across the wild landscape of the California gold rush. The dangers you face are many, though they often linger in the quiet spaces between moments, rather than in sudden bursts of action. The threat of violence is never far, not in grand battles, but in the sharp, sudden flash of conflict between neighbors, claim jumpers, or desperate men pushed to their limits. You hear the distant murmur of voices heated by suspicion, the occasional low curse whispered under breath, the cautious footsteps of men moving silently through the night, wary of eyes and ears. Claim jumpers, those who seize others' hard-won land, cast a long shadow over your days. They do not always confront openly. Sometimes it is the quiet removal of a stake, a moved rock, a subtly erased mark. You check your claim repeatedly, the weight of fear pressing gently, persistently, like the cold morning mist settling over the river. The law, such as it is irregular and unevenly applied. Sheriffs and marshals often have to patrol vast territories, arriving long after disputes have settled into bitterness or bloodshed. Justice can feel distant and slow, like a far-off bell tolling faintly through the fog. Disputes might be settled by rough councils of miners, their voices low but firm, or by the more final language of gunfire echoing through the hills. Yet these moments are often whispered about later, softened in retelling. The focus more on survival than on spectacle. Beyond human threats, nature itself reminds you of its unpredictable power. The cold, swift currents of the rivers are a constant danger, eager to claim tools, supplies, or even lives with sudden sweeps beneath the water. Winter storms arrive with fierce winds, and the heavy rains turn trails into sticky mud, making every step a careful, tiring effort. Wild animals occasionally wander close to camp, curious or hungry. Coyotes' distant howls punctuate the night, a constant reminder of the wilderness pressing in on all sides. Disease, too, lingers quietly among the miners, not always noticed until its effects appear as weakness, fever, or quiet disappearance from camp. The lack of sanitation, the close quarters, the harsh conditions, all conspire to make illness a slow, unseen adversary. You learn quickly that caution is a constant companion. You keep your tools close, your supplies guarded. You observe your neighbors with measured eyes, aware of both kindness and quiet calculation. Trust is a rare commodity, earned slowly and held carefully. In these conditions, even small acts of kindness, a shared meal, a word of warning, a fire tended carefully against the night chill, become precious moments of light in the relentless grind. Despite the dangers, life in the camp persists, a rhythm of endurance and quiet hope. You find yourself folding into this rhythm, your senses attuned to the soft creak of wood, the flicker of firelight, the subtle shifts of the wind and voices. These details, these small certainties, become the anchors that keep you steady. So, you breathe deeply, letting the night sounds wash over you. The rustling leaves, the distant voices, the gentle murmur of the river, all blending into a soft, lulling backdrop as sleep begins to claim you. And as you drift, you carry with you the steady heartbeat of the camp, its struggles, its dangers, and its stubborn pulse of life. Now, imagine that the sky above the camp has deepened to its darkest blue. The stars have begun to prick through the night silent and cold and too distant to offer comfort. The fire has burned low. The sounds of camp have quieted into the hush of sleep. Only the river still murmurs, like a quiet thought, repeating itself over and over. And you lie there in your makeshift shelter, your limbs stiff beneath worn blankets, your boots tucked under your head, your body heavy with fatigue but your mind still turning. You begin to ask yourself, softly, questions you've likely asked many nights before. What am I doing here? You were promised fortune, not in words, necessarily, but in the glint of posters, in the buzz of port towns, in the wide-eyed tales of others who left before you and never returned. The promise wasn't always spoken aloud, but it sat heavily in the silence of decision, whispered in the clink of coins you didn't yet own. You believed that gold, this quiet, lifeless metal buried deep in cold hills, could change everything. But now, lying here months later, your body sore from endless labor, your hands cracked from river silt, your belly half empty, you begin to understand something else. The gold was never really the point. Out here, in the margins of the world, life becomes slower, thinner. You begin to notice the details that once passed you by. The weight of your breath on a cold morning, the feel of wool on your skin after it's dried by the fire, the slow shifting of clouds that signal the coming of rain. The emotional rhythm of a miner's life is not made of highs and lows, but of waiting, of long stretches of effort with no guarantee, of believing in something just enough to try again, one more day. There's frustration, of course. Days when the cold sets deep into your bones, when the pan yields nothing but stones, and when every meal tastes of ash and salt. There are moments you catch yourself staring too long at the gold you haven't found, wondering what you've given up to come here. The life you left behind, the people whose letters come less frequently now, written in smaller handwriting, as if even they are beginning to forget the shape of your name. But there are other emotions, too. Stranger ones, a peculiar sense of peace and repetition, a dull comfort in knowing that tomorrow will look much like today. And the day after, too. The rhythm becomes something you can lean on. You begin to talk less and listen more. The world around you sharpens. You hear the tone in a fellow miner's cough and know it's serious. You hear the difference between laughter and nervousness. You learn who watches others' claims too closely and who shares without being asked. And slowly, in the quiet, you begin to change. You stop counting what you have and start noticing what you can endure. A week without fresh bread, a month without a letter, a season with barely any flakes in your pan. You do not break. You simply go on. There's sadness, too. Not loud or showy, not the kind that draws tears, just a soft kind of missing. The scent of something baking far away. A familiar song you once heard played on a proper piano. A voice you knew in a language you haven't spoken aloud in months. But somehow, these feelings don't make the camp feel lonelier. They make it feel human. They're small signs that you still remember who you were, even as you become something else entirely. Now and then, there are moments of connection, a shared joke over bad coffee, a warm coat passed quietly to someone whose firewood ran out. These gestures are rare, but they carry more weight out here, where nothing is taken for granted. You begin to realize that fortune does not always come in gold. Sometimes, it arrives in a dry pair of socks, in a night without rain, in the unexpected silence of your own thoughts, and sometimes, even in a dream that still lives in you, even when the gold does not. So you lie in your bunk, your hands resting on your chest, the weight of blankets and fatigue anchoring you gently in place. The fire is only embers now. The voices outside have all gone quiet. Only the wind and river remain. And as your eyes close, you carry the sound of that river with you. You carry the weight of unspoken stories, of dreams, quietly reshaped by labor and time. You carry a piece of a history that most will never read in books. The slow, ordinary, human kind. The kind that unfolds not in triumphs or discoveries, but in the steady heartbeat of a life endured. And as you drift toward sleep, the world of the miner fades into the hush of the night. You are no longer cold, no longer waiting. You are simply resting, carried gently by the rhythm of the past. Before denim, before copper rivets, before ships, and storehouses and cities on hills, there was a boy named Loeb, not yet Levi, not yet an icon, just Loeb Strauss, the younger son in a modest home, in a small slow-moving village called Buttenheim, nestled in the Franconian countryside of Bavaria, in what is now southern Germany. It is winter, the year is 1829, and the boy is born under a low ceiling warmed by a clay hearth. Outside, snow has drifted into the corners of timber-framed houses. The roof sagged gently under its weight, and the trees are still, bare-limbed against a silvery sky. The street outside is more a path than a road, packed dirt beneath the snow, and the sound of passing wheels when they come is soft and slow. This is a world without haste. Buttenheim is not a place people seek. It is a place people are born into and often never leave. A town of fewer than 1,000. Its life is shaped by rhythms that have not changed for generations. Planting, harvesting, market days, feast days. The church bells ring the hours with slow precision. Chickens pick their way across courtyards. On cold days, the air smells of wood smoke and animal feed. On warm ones, of earth and rye and soapstone warmed by sun. The Strauss home stands modestly near the village center, one of several narrow houses painted in soft ochres and whites, with beams darkened by time and weather. The family is Jewish. part of a small, tightly regulated community within the village. Their house is modest 2 stories, with steep wooden stairs and small paned windows that fog easily in winter. Loeb's father, Hirsch Strauss, is a dry goods peddler. He sells bolts of cloth, spools of thread, sewing needles, ribbons, and simple garments. These he carries from town to town in a cart or wrapped in bundles across his back. His routes take him across muddy lanes and forest paths, stopping in farmyards and hamlets, calling softly at doors to offer his wares. It is quiet work, honest, tiring, and seasonal. His mother, Rebecca, manages the home. Her days are long and precise, tending to meals, sewing by lamplight, drying herbs in the window, and minding 7 children. The Strauss household is full but ordered. Food is simple, schedules are consistent, and warmth, though hard-won, is present in the form of routine and closeness. Life for Jewish families in Bavaria at that time was defined as much by absence as by presence. There were no pogroms here, not in the sense of violence, but a framework of quiet, bureaucratic restriction that touched every part of life. Only certain towns allowed Jewish residency. Marriage rights were rationed by the state. Professions were limited. Education was often separate, not always loudly enforced. These limits existed like frost on a window, always visible, always cold to the touch. The Jewish community in Buttenheim was small, likely fewer than 24 families, each carrying the weight of quiet observation. Papers were required for everything. Permission was needed not just to move or marry, but to set up a trade, open a shop, or repair a home. These weren't laws meant to provoke, but to contain, and so life became small, careful, contained. For a young Loeb, these restrictions were not yet fully understood. What he knew was the creak of stairs, the crackle of firewood, the scent of cloth, newly unpacked from his father's bundles. Perhaps he watched his older brothers press buttons into neat rows on velvet display cloths, or saw Rebecca knead bread with hands that never paused. He might have played in the alleys between buildings, running fingers over the stone grooves in the walls, or wandered to the fields just outside the village, where rye and barley rose in thick, whispering waves. The seasons marked time more than clocks. Spring meant thin calves and warmer winds. Autumn meant smoke and squash and damp floors. Though he was the youngest, he would have understood his place. Bavarian inheritance law at the time gave limited rights to younger sons. The eldest might inherit a father's trade license, if one existed. The others, often, could not. This was not considered cruel, it was orderly, but it left little space for a child to grow into something different than what he was handed. Loeb likely saw the emotional tension his parents carried, the worry behind Hirsch's eyes when winter arrived early, the long silences between adults when news came from nearby cities, new edicts, new taxes, new whispers about change. But these fears were not they were folded into the fabric of everyday life, like patches hidden inside seams. And then, illness arrived. Hirsch began coughing, at first, lightly, then more often. A wet, dragging sound that stayed long after he tried to clear his throat. He grew thin, his steps slowed. It was tuberculosis, though they might have called it something simpler: consumption, the wasting disease. No one had cures, only rest, poultices, and waiting. And Hirsch had no time to wait. The work stopped. The family's income thinned like watered soup. Older sons did what they could. Rebecca rationed food more tightly, sewed longer by lamplight, and spoke more softly than ever. The home grew quieter, though it had never been loud. Hirsch died not with ceremony, but in the quiet stillness of a room that had known both joy and hardship. He was buried in the Jewish cemetery nearby, where the stones are plain and low to the ground. There was mourning, but more than that, there was decision. For Rebecca left with children still too young to support themselves. The world had narrowed too much. There was no room to remain. The idea of emigration had already touched the family. 2 of the older Strauss sons had left for America, to a place called New York, where Jews could live more freely and build businesses without permits. They sent back letters, always hopeful but practical. They described streets paved not with gold, but with opportunity, and they spoke of space room to breathe, to work, to begin again. In 1847, when Loeb was just 18, Rebecca made her choice. It was not dramatic. No declarations were made. The family did not pack in a rush. They packed slowly, folding garments carefully, wrapping pots in cloth, sewing hidden coins into linings. The journey ahead was long. By a cart to the nearest city, then train or riverboat to a port, and finally across the wide Atlantic. Weeks of sailing, confined to bunks below deck, fed on salted meat and hope. Buttenheim did not weep for their leaving. It was not uncommon by then. Other families had done the same. The village watched them go, quietly, as it had watched others. A few neighbors nodded solemnly. A few children watched from behind shutters. And Loeb left the only home he had known. Perhaps he looked back once, at the houses clustered together like folded hands. At the lanes he had walked 1,000 times. At the steeple and the smoke and the hills that curved like a cradle around the village. He did not know what he would find in the new world, only that it would be different. And that difference, however uncertain, was the only path forward. In this way, Levi Strauss, the future businessman, the future outfitter of the American West, began not with ambition or invention, but with limitation, with quiet endurance, with a life shaped more by necessity than by vision. The boy who would become a name on every denim label first lived behind the curtains of Histrion, a home of cold mornings, soft lamplight, and long, cautious silences. And now, we turn our gaze westward, across the Atlantic, where Loeb would land in a city unlike anything he had known. The next chapter would unfold not in stillness, but in steam and soot and noise. In New York City, where the rhythm of life quickened, an opportunity stirred quietly, like thread waiting to be drawn through fabric. When Loeb Strauss stepped onto American soil in the year 1847, the world around him must have felt impossibly large. He had left behind the damp fields and narrow alleys of Bavaria, and now stood among a tide of strangers on the edge of a city so alive, so expansive, that it seemed to breathe. New York, in the mid-19th century, was not the polished metropolis it would one day become, but a rough and swelling sea of humanity, rising with every ship that pulled into the harbor. Imagine that harbor now. The scent of salt and coal smoke hangs in the air. Barges and ferries jostle gently against creaking piers. Men call out in German, Italian, Irish, Gaelic, and Yiddish, their words lost amid the rumble of wagon wheels and the hiss of steam. The waterfront is lined with boxes, barrels, and crates, stacked, chest-high, some full of china, others of cloth, tea. Seagulls wheel above, their cries sharp against the low hum of the city, and beneath it all, a rhythm slow but constant, the rise and fall of footsteps on wet cobblestone, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the shuffle of bodies finding their place in a city already straining at its seams. Loeb found shelter not in boarding houses or hostels, but with family. Two of his older brothers, Jonas and Louis Strauss, had come to America earlier and established themselves as dry goods merchants selling cloth, buttons, thread, and other essentials to working-class families. The business was modest, but growing, and Loeb, now barely 18, joined them as an apprentice in both name and labor. The shop itself was small but orderly, located in the bustling Lower East Side of Manhattan. Its walls were lined with bolts of fabric, some plain and practical, others dyed in soft pastels or earth tones. There were spools of thread in neat rows, stacks of folded trousers, wooden drawers of brass buttons, thimbles and needles, and shelves of undergarments and coats stacked with care. The air inside the shop was a mix of cotton dust, floor polish, and warm oil lamps. Its narrow wooden counter bore the soft scratches of years of use. On any given morning, the front bell might chime softly as a customer entered, brushing snow from their shoulders or shaking the rain from a wide-brimmed hat. Housewives came looking for linens. Laborers needed work shirts. Seamstresses bought remnants for repair and custom orders. The Strauss brothers served them all, patiently, methodically, building a reputation for reliability, fair prices, and honesty. There was nothing flashy about their business, but in those days, steady mattered more than showy. And Loeb, the quietest of the brothers, observed everything. He watched how customers were greeted not with sales pitches, but with nods and soft questions. He noticed how his brothers remembered names, personal details, favorite cloth weights, or a child's illness. Trust was a currency, and it was earned slowly. Loeb worked long hours in the shop, carrying bolts of cloth up and down the storage stairs, sweeping sawdust from the floors, folding and refolding displays until the edges aligned just so. At night, he returned to a shared apartment above the shop or nearby, where the walls were thin and the evenings short. He ate simple meals, boiled potatoes, stewed vegetables, and pickled fish, surrounded by a growing community of German Jewish immigrants, many of whom had also left home under difficult circumstances. During this time, a small shift occurred quietly, almost without notice. Loeb began to go by a new name, Levi. We cannot know the precise moment when he chose it. Perhaps it was a gradual change, a practical adaptation for ease of speech, or a desire to blend more easily into a place where names were constantly being But Levi, rooted in tradition yet flexible in sound, became his public name. The symbolism, though unspoken, was quiet and powerful. A man becoming something more than his origins, not erasing them, but allowing room to grow. Levi was no longer just the boy from Buttenheim, youngest of 7, hemmed in by law and inheritance. He was now a man in motion, adapting to the world he found himself in, not with rebellion or pride, but with quiet, unshakable resolve. The 1850s were years of expansion, both for Levi personally and for the nation. Railroads spread, carrying goods and people farther west. Telegraphs clicked, messages across wires that seemed to shrink the country mile by mile. And then came the rumor, then the news, and finally, the rush of gold in California. It began in 1848, but by 1849, the trickle of dreamers had turned into a flood. Ships left New York weekly, filled with men and supplies bound for San Francisco, a city growing faster than it could be measured. The promise of riches drew all kinds: carpenters, clerks, farmers, sons of merchants, deserters, and dreamers. Many arrived expecting to find gold in every stream, only to discover backbreaking labor, muddy camps, cold nights, and wild prices. From his modest position behind the counter in Manhattan, Levi watched and listened. The opportunity, when it revealed itself, was not gilded. It was practical. While others chased veins of quartz through riverbed, Levi understood a different truth: that even the luckiest miner needed clothing, tools, fabric, and supplies. Shirts tore, pants frayed, tents leaked, and no one could afford to waste time waiting for new goods to be shipped slowly from the east. He would not dig for gold. He would sell to those who did. It was a decision not made in haste or excitement, but in measured thought. Levi had learned to read people, how they moved, what they asked, what they lacked. And California, by all accounts, lacked everything. A man who could supply goods consistently, fairly, and quickly would never need to mine gold to prosper. So, in 1853, Levi Strauss packed his belongings and the wares of his new endeavor. His brothers supported the expansion. They supplied the inventory, loaned funds, and gave their blessing. With dry goods bundled securely, he boarded a steamship, then crossed the Isthmus of Panama by land, a dangerous and difficult shortcut before the canal existed, before finally sailing up the Pacific coast to San Francisco. He arrived not with grandeur, but with fabric and foresight. It's worth pausing here. There is something quietly poetic about a man who left Bavaria for survival, who worked without fanfare in his brother's shop, who changed his name not for vanity, but for belonging. Now stepping onto the shores of California, not with gold fever, but with needles, thread, and cloth. While others staked claims in frozen riverbeds, Levi's gold lay folded in canvas and duck cloth. He would not be the loudest voice in San Francisco, nor the richest at first, but he would be something rarer, constant presence in a city defined by flux. In time, that steadiness would become something much more. In the next segment, we will follow Levi's quiet rise, not as a fortune hunter, but as a merchant who understood what people truly needed. We'll explore the mystery of lost gold troves, tales of abandoned claims, flooded canyons, and the legends that grew in the shadow of broken dreams. For now, picture Levi's first days in the city by the bay. The harbor alive with gulls, the hills sharp with eucalyptus, the streets unpaved and uncertain, but full of possibility, and Levi calm, observant, and quietly ready. There was no railroad across the continent in the 1850s, no airplane, no highway, no easy way where. The only path from New York to California, at least the one Levi Strauss chose, was by water, all the way down and around the southern edge of the world. It was a journey that would take more than half a year. Imagine the port of New York, a granite stone piers jutting into the Hudson River, the cries of vendors hawking bread, apples, tobacco, and tin cups, 2 passengers preparing for voyages that might change their lives forever. Men in worn coats hoist trunks onto steamer decks, while others mill quietly with bundles wrapped in linen and tied with rope. Steam hisses from funnels. A breeze rustles the sails. Somewhere nearby, a church bell chimes the hour. The ship Levi boarded was one of many bound for California, but this was not a direct passage. There were 2 routes at the time. A risky and disease-ridden shortcut through Panama and a far longer, more punishing one around the jagged tip of South America. Cape Horn Levy chose the latter. For months, the ship would become his entire world. The days aboard ship passed, not quickly, but in a slow and steady rhythm. The creak of the timbers, the low moan of the wind in the rigging, the crash of waves against the hull. Most days were spent above deck, wrapped in coats against the salt air. The smell of tar, old wood, salt water, and oil clung to everything. Meals were simple and repetitive: hardtack, salt pork, beans if you were lucky. Tea was made from water that grew stale and brackish over time. Sleep came in narrow hammocks or tight bunks below deck, where the air was always damp and the sway of the ship never ceased. Reading, if they could. Sewing, scraping pipes clean, watching the endless blue-gray waves. Sometimes, someone would sing a low tune. Other times, silence fell for hours, interrupted only by the calls of sailors hauling canvas, or the bell marking another shift in the ship's routine. And then, gradually, the weather would change. As they reached the lower latitudes, the wind grew stronger. The ship pitched harder. Rain came in slanting sheets. Waves crashed over the deck, and for days at a time, all movement ceased but the lurching of the vessel. It was a place few had seen: the icy waters near Cape Horn, the bottom of the world. There, the days shortened, and the air carried the bitter breath of Antarctic winds. The sails strained. The captain barked orders. Fires below deck sputtered and barely kept the cold at bay. But then, slowly, the ship rounded the Horn. The wind eased. The waters calmed. The temperature began to climb again. It would still be weeks before they reached California, but by now, the sky felt different. The light had changed, and at last, in the distance, the coast came into view. San Francisco, in 1853, was not yet a city in any proper sense. It was a collection of dreams built on mud and sand, perched between sea and steep hills, shrouded often in mist, and loud with noise, both human and natural. The ship pulled into the Bay of San Francisco, which yawned open like an enormous mouth, ringed by forested ridges and scattered water. Sea lions barked in the shallows. Seabirds circled overhead. The scent of salt, smoke, and eucalyptus drifted on the breeze. The docks were crowded with ships, some recently arrived, others abandoned, left behind by crews who had rushed inland in pursuit of gold. Many of these vessels would never sail again. Their hulls became floating warehouses or even repurposed shops, tethered permanently to the wharves as part of the city's swelling edge. Levi stepped ashore into a kaleidoscope of motion and language. Chinese porters moved crates. Irish laborers shouted for transport. Spanish ranchers rode through the muddy streets on horseback. Shop signs advertised goods in English, German, French, and Cantonese. The streets were barely streets at all, just deep ruts of wet earth, churned by hooves and wagon wheels, slick with clay and gravel. Buildings were hastily built. Many leaned slightly, as though unsure of how long they'd be standing. Canvas tents and plank storefronts lined the main avenues. Barkers called out from stalls selling boots, tin pans, knives, and bread. Inside saloons, laughter mixed with the clink of coins and the low twang of a fiddle. Outside, children played beside wagons, heavy with flour and beans. And everywhere, the scent of ambition lingered in the air. Somewhere on the hill, fires burned in iron stoves. Someone boiled coffee. A man hammered nails into green wood. Levi took in this new world with calm, quiet attention. He did not come to pan rivers. He did not bring a pickaxe or shovel. What he carried were bolts of cloth, sturdy tools, and well-made supplies. He had barrels of fabric, lengths of canvas, buttons, threads, and wares, carefully packed and labeled. It was not gold, but it was what the miners needed. He would serve the diggers, not join them. With the help of contacts from his brother's business back east, Levi quickly found a storefront, a small space in a growing district, near the wharves, but not too far from the footpaths that led to the gold fields. He unpacked his goods slowly, arranging them as he once had in New York, but this time under different skies. It was a dry goods store, plain and purposeful, but in a place where trousers tore easily, tents ripped in the wind, and men often owned only what they wore. Levi's offerings were more valuable than they first appeared. Here, in this noisy and uncertain place, Levi Strauss quietly began again. Each morning, he swept the front step, lit the lamps, waited for miners to return from the hills and camps, pockets empty or full, but always in need of something durable. He was not yet famous, not yet the name sewn into millions of pockets, but the first threads were in place, and San Francisco chaotic, muddy, and alive would become the backdrop for a very different kind of fortune. As the days slipped softly into months, Levi Strauss's dry goods shop began to take shape not as a grand emporium, but as a humble, steady presence amid the restless pulse of San Francisco. Imagine the shop itself. A narrow, weathered wooden building pressed close to its neighbors. Its front windows were small but clear, catching the muted sunlight that filtered through the ever-present fog rolling off the bay. Inside, the air was cool and thick with a mingled sense of cotton, wool, and leather. The faint tang of oil and beeswax used to preserve leather goods lingered quietly in the corners. Levi arranged his inventory with careful precision, each item a small promise of usefulness in a place where necessities could be as scarce as gold. Rows of canvas bolts, heavy and coarse, stood against one wall. This sturdy cloth was essential to miners who needed tents and packs tough enough to withstand the constant wear of the wilderness. Canvas was more than fabric here. It was sheltered, protection from sun and rain and the biting wind. On shelves, neat stacks of pins and needles waited, along with spools of thread in muted colors. Dark browns, soft grays, faded blues. These small tools were quiet lifelines, allowing men to mend torn clothing or patch up gear hastily before heading back into the hills. Levi's shop also held pots and pans, blackened by travel, but essential for cooking over open fires. There were sturdy knives, blades sharp and reliable, tucked into leather sheath, scissors with rust-resistant steel, scissors that cut cloth and paper and sometimes hair. Each item was chosen not for luxury, but for lasting usefulness. Behind the counter, there were stacks of buttons, brass, bone, and wood carefully sorted by size and color. Miners, outfitting themselves with worn jackets and trousers, often stopped by to replace lost buttons or sew-on patches, making their garments last longer. This was not a place of grandeur, but of necessity. Lever's days unfolded with quiet routine. He would arrive early, before the city had fully stirred. The creak of the shop's wooden floorboards echoed softly as he lit the oil lamps, their gentle glow pushing back the morning mist filtering through the small windows. The faint murmur of the bay, with ships creaking and seagulls calling in the distance, was a steady companion. Clients came and went, men with sunburned faces and rough hands, their boots caked with dust or mud, clutching handfuls of coins or promising payment when the next shipment arrived. There was an unspoken rhythm to these interactions. Levi listened more than he spoke, his steady gaze offering reassurance amid the uncertainty that shadowed so many lives here. In a place where fortunes could be made and lost by sunrise, where the earth was gouged open and abandoned as quickly as it was claimed, trust was as valuable as gold. And slowly, word spread that Levi Strauss was a man of fairness and dependability. His prices were honest, never exploiting the desperation around him. When supplies ran low, he found ways to keep goods moving, negotiating with suppliers far away in the east and even across the Pacific. For miners, this reliability was a small island in the chaos of certainty that, when all else failed, there was a place to find shelter for belongings, needles for stitching, and canvas for tents. Levi became more than a merchant. He was a quiet fixture in the shifting tides of the gold rush community. Life beyond the shop was modest but comfortable in its own way. Levi's living quarters were likely a small room just above the store. Picture this intimate space with its creaky wooden floorboards, worn smooth from years of footsteps. A simple cot with a wool blanket lay tucked in a corner. A narrow window framed a view of fog drifting over the bay, thick and silvery in the early morning light. On the wooden desk, a few books, perhaps a ledger here, a journal, there rested beneath a flickering oil lamp. The faint aroma of tobacco smoke mingled with the scent of damp wood and salt air. At night, the sounds of the city soft but never fully disappeared. From below came the low murmur of sailors preparing ships for the next voyage. The occasional call of a watchman's bell, the distant crackle of horses' hooves on cobblestones. Sometimes, Levi would stand at his window and gaze out over the harbor, the water shimmering faintly under the moonlight. The wooden piers, the moored ships, and the distant hills were all quiet witnesses to the slow building of his new life. This life, marked by steady days and modest comfort, was a contrast to the often chaotic and unpredictable existence of while others risked everything digging in cold rivers and precarious mountain camps, Levi built slowly, piece by piece, a foundation that would endure. There was a certain poetry in this quiet perseverance, Imagine the miners trudging home after long days, their faces etched with fatigue, their clothes torn and stained. They sought refuge, warmth, and the simple promise of dependable goods. And Levi's shop, with its well-worn doors and humble shelves, was there to welcome them. The relationship between Levi and the miners was subtle and unspoken. It was built on shared endurance, two sides of the same restless gold rush coin. The miners labored in the elements, forever chasing fortune amid the rough landscape, while Levi provided the materials that allowed their efforts to continue, the tools and cloth that shielded them from the harshness of the wilderness. In that mutual dependence, there was an understated respect. Levi's business was not yet famous, nor was it easy. Every day held the uncertainty of supply lines and the constant challenge of a city still finding its footing. But slowly, the threads began to weave into a tapestry of trust and stability. It was here, amid the fog, the mud, and the clatter of the bustling port, that Levi Strauss began to transform from a newcomer into a cornerstone of San Francisco's growing community. And though the gold might glitter elsewhere, Levi's quiet enterprise laid the groundwork for something lasting, something that would outlive the fevered rush of the miners and endure in the pockets of countless generations. As Levi Strauss's business quietly flourished in San Francisco, a new chapter was unfolding, not on the bustling streets or in the crowded market, but in the small, steady hands of a tailor named Jacob Davis. Picture Davis's modest workshop in Nevada, a humble space tucked between rugged hills and dusty streets. The room is lit softly by a single oil lamp, its flickering glow casting long shadows over the scattered tools of the trade. Spools of thread in muted browns and grays, and bolts of thick fabric leaning gently against the walls. The faint scent of wax and leather lingers in the air, mingling with the dry dust that drifts through the open window. Jacob Davis worked quietly, but with a practiced, steady rhythm. His clients were men whose lives revolved around hard labor, ranchers, and laborers who faced the relentless demands of the frontier. Their clothes, unlike today's casual wear, had to endure the strain of constant use. Every pocket was a tool holder, every seam a line of defense against the wear and tear of long days under unforgiving conditions. Davis noticed the persistent problem that plagued these hard-working men. Their trousers, often made of heavy cotton or canvas, wore thin quickly, especially around the pockets where picks, shovels, and tools dug into the fabric. Torn pockets meant more than inconvenience. It meant their tools could be lost or damaged, and their modest protection against the elements was compromised. The constant repair or replacement of clothing was a drain on their limited resources. With the patience born of necessity, Davis began experimenting in his workshop. Instead of merely patching the tears, he sought a more lasting solution. Slowly and carefully, he started reinforcing the areas most vulnerable to wear with small copper rivets. These tiny metal studs were hammered into place with gentle precision, set to bear the brunt of the strain and protect the fabric beneath. Imagine the sound of the hammer's soft tap echoing in the quiet workshop, a rhythmic and reassuring noise, steady and purposeful. The rivets glinted faintly in the lamplight, like small sentinels guarding against the inevitable wear. His trousers were stitched with heavy thread, the seams thick and tightly bound to hold together under pressure. The fabric itself was coarse denim, rough but resilient, a material chosen for its ability to stand up to the gritty demands of mining and manual work. Each pair of pants was designed not only to be functional, but to endure, to be a partner to the men who wore them through dust and sweat, sun and rain. One evening, perhaps after a long day of fitting trousers and mending tears, Davis took up his pen by the soft glow of candlelight. The room was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant murmur of a small town winding down for the night. He wrote a letter, a careful, formal note addressed to Levi, who by then had become a well-known supplier of dry goods and fabric to miners and workers in the region. The letter spoke of the riveted trousers and the promise they held for men who toiled endlessly in the California goldfields and beyond. There was a polite urgency in Davis's tone, a quiet hope that Levi would see the value in this practical invention not as a grand gesture, but as a solution born of experience and necessity. Picture the letter, folded and sealed, making its slow journey westward, carried by horse and wagon through dusty plains and rugged mountains, finally reaching Levi's office in San Francisco. Here, amidst the faint scent of ink and paper, Strauss would have unfolded the letter carefully, reading and rereading its contents with thoughtful attention. Levi Strauss, ever the practical businessman, recognized the potential immediately, not in flashy promises, but in steady reliability. He saw how the riveted trousers could complement his existing goods. how this innovation might meet a real and pressing need. It was not a sudden leap of ambition, but a steady decision made with clear eyes. Thus began a partnership that would quietly change the world of work. Levi and Jacob Davis joined forces, combining Strauss's established supply network and resources with Davis's inventive spirit and craftsmanship. Together they set about formalizing their collaboration through the process of patenting the riveted trousers. The patent filing was a moment of quiet significance, a legal acknowledgement of their invention, a promise that their design was unique and protected. Visualize the patent document itself. A carefully crafted sheet of parchment, inked with precise letters and signatures, embodying months of work, thought, and collaboration. It represented more than just fabric and metal. It was a safeguard for a product designed to withstand the daily grind of frontier life. Now, slow your thoughts and imagine those first pairs of jeans as they emerged from workshops and dry goods stores. The denim was thick and somewhat stiff, yet flexible enough to allow movement. The coarse texture might have felt unfamiliar at first, sturdy beneath rough hands, with a slight graininess that spoke of resilience. The copper rivets, placed at critical stress points, like the corners of pockets and along the seams, caught the light with a gentle gleam. Each rivet was a silent guardian, holding the fabric together through every bend, lift, and shift. The stitching was dense, its heavy thread tracing firm lines across the fabric, binding the garment with an unyielding strength. Imagine slipping into those early trousers feeling the weight of their construction. Designed for men who shoveled gravel and swung picks under the blazing sun, they bore the marks of their purpose, durability, protection, and a quiet dignity rooted in hard work. These jeans were more than just clothing. They were a companion to those who carved their lives from the raw land miners, braving cold streams and rocky hills, laborers enduring long days with few comforts. The jeans carried their stories silently, woven from fabric, metal, and necessity. Over time, what began as simple work, trousers would grow into an icon recognized far beyond the American West. But here, in the heart of the gold rush, they started humbly crafted with care, shaped by experience, and built to endure. As you imagine those early moments, the quiet clatter of a hammer on rivets, the soft rustle of denim being sewn, allow yourself to feel the slow rhythm of creation to steady.com progress, of an invention born in the margins, made for the everyday struggles of ordinary people. As the years unfolded in San Francisco's restless landscape, Levi Strauss quietly settled into a life defined more by constancy than spectacle. Imagine the man in those times still, deliberate, a calm presence amid the feverish pulse of a city still coming to terms with the gold rush as aftershocks. Levi's story, unlike many chasing gold's glittering promise, was one of steady hands and measured steps. Levi never married. In the swirl of gold rush tumult, this bachelorhood was not marked by loneliness, but rather by a certain tranquility and acceptance of a life lived on his own terms. Without the trappings of a large family or the distractions of romance, he found companionship in the rhythm of his work, the quiet loyalty of friends and business partners, and the modest comforts of his San Francisco home. Picture a small, warmly lit room above his shop, where creaking floorboards spoke softly underfoot, and fog rolled gently off the bay, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and salt air. This home was no grand mansion but a refuge, a place of soft light and steady quiet. Here, Levy's philanthropy gently touched the city around him, not with fanfare or headline-grabbing gestures, but with sincere, unobtrusive generosity. He supported schools striving to take root in a young city, aided places of worship, and extended a helping hand in times of hardship to neighbors struggling with the sudden shifts that accompanied rapid growth and change. Such acts were woven quietly into the fabric of his life. Like the thick denim of his trousers, rough, yet reliable, they formed a subtle support system for a community in flux. Levy's kindness was not loudly proclaimed, but was felt as a gentle warmth, an enduring steadiness in a time often defined by uncertainty and upheaval. San Francisco in those days was a place of contrasts. The raw energy of newcomers hopeful for fortune, the chaos of makeshift streets and hastily raised buildings. The scent of the bay mixed with the smoke of countless hearths and workshops. Among this vibrant, often unpredictable environment, Lever's dry goods business stood as a beacon of dependability. Customers came to trust him, not only for the quality of the goods he sold, pins, scissors, sturdy thread, and durable pots, but also for the fairness of his dealings and the reliability of his word. As you imagine Levi moving through this bustling world, You might see him pausing to greet a familiar face, exchanging a few quiet words with a miner in need of mending trousers or a family seeking household supplies. These small interactions, simple yet sincere, built a foundation of trust and respect that extended far beyond the walls of his shop. It is in this context that Levy's legacy takes on a particular warmth. The gold rush, with all its fevered searches and sudden windfalls, was a time of unpredictability and, often, fleeting fortune. Men and women rushed headlong into the unknown, chasing promises of wealth beneath dirt and rock. Yet Levy's vision was different. He understood that beneath every miner's hopeful quest was a need for something more lasting, a fabric to protect their limbs, a tool that would endure the strain of relentless labor, a steadfast presence in a world that often felt like shifting sand. His invention, the blue jeans, emerged not from a desire for glory, but from a patient understanding of real needs. Coarse denim, thick stitching, and copper rivets were more than just features of durable clothing. They were expressions of endurance and care. These garments became companions to those who toiled under the sun and rain, whose days were marked by the slow, steady rhythm of digging, lifting, and carrying. Through this quiet contribution, Levi gave the gold rush something profound, a sense of durability, a tangible form of resilience. His work did not sparkle like gold dust in the sunlight, but it held up under gold's weight, under the sweat, the dirt, and the demands of daily toil. This gift, this presence is subtle, yet deeply enduring. As the city evolved, so too did Levi's place within it. His steady approach and thoughtful kindness earned him a respected place in San Francisco society. Not one to seek the spotlight, he was known as a man of principle, a figure whose reputation was built on fairness and genuine care rather than ostentation. And now, as you listen and feel Levi's story fold softly beside you like a worn but well-loved coat that has weathered many seasons, there is a sense of quiet comfort. His life, steady and durable, is a gentle reminder that not all legacies shout to be heard. Some simply endure. With Levi's story gently resting in the background, let us now turn our attention to the mysteries of the gold rush. He never chased the abandoned claims and the whispered legends of hidden caches. These tales, too, hold their own quiet fascination, inviting us to explore not just the glitter of fortune, but the shadows and secrets left behind. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a landscape touched by time, a place where the restless energy of gold rush days has softened into calm, almost forgotten whispers. Picture a gentle river winding slowly through a narrow valley, its waters clear and cool, moving in an unhurried flow that has lasted for centuries. The sound of the water is constant, a soft, soothing murmur that laps gently against smooth river stones, worn round by countless seasons of rain and thaw. You stand at the water's edge, feel the cool dampness of moss beneath your fingers as you reach down to touch a patch of velvety green. Growing thick on the riverbank's shaded side, the air is fresh, scented faintly with the pine and cedar that tower quietly above, their tall trunks rising straight into a soft canopy of needles that filters sunlight into dappled patterns on the earth below. The breeze moves slowly, just enough to stir the leaves, sending them into a delicate rustle, a whispering sound, like the softest sighs of the forest itself. Imagine the gentle creak of branches swaying, the occasional flutter of a bird's wings, and the distant call of a lone crow echoing faintly against the hills. The world feels still, yet deeply alive in subtle, quiet ways. Take a deep breath. The air smells clean, tinged with the faint, earthy richness of damp soil and decomposing leaves. There is the faint trace of wood smoke carried on the breeze, perhaps from a campfire long since extinguished, a memory of people who once passed this way. Imagine the warmth of that fire, the smell of burning pine needles mingling with the crisp forest air. Look closer at the ground beneath your feet. The soil is soft and springy, covered with a patchwork of fallen leaves, small twigs, and the occasional glint of mica or quartz catching the light. Nearby, smooth river stones have gathered in quiet clusters, some flat, perfect for sitting, others rounded, like the gentle curves of an old hand. This is the quiet landscape where stories of lost gold troves begin not in loud clamor or violent rush, but in slow, steady rhythms of nature and memory. Imagine that centuries ago, miners stood where you stand now, water rushing past their boots as they dipped pans into the river's swirling pools, searching patiently for the faintest sparkle of gold. Their faces were lined with hope and weariness, their hands raw from endless hours of cold water and coarse gravel. The river itself, unchanged in its flow, keeps secrets in its depths. The ground, shaped by countless seasons, holds stories in its folds. Stories of discovery and loss, of hands that once clawed at the earth and eyes that scanned every stone for a gleam. But now, those days have quieted, the frenetic energy of the gold rush replaced by a calm that almost hums beneath the surface. Imagine yourself walking slowly upstream, feeling the soft crunch of earth beneath your boots, pausing occasionally to run your hand along the bark of an ancient cedar or to bend and pick up a stone, smoothed by time. The river bends gently, creating small pools where water lies still, reflecting the sky in quiet silver mirrors. Nearby, the undergrowth is thick with ferns and wildflowers, delicate blues, soft yellows, and gentle whites that nod in the breeze like a silent chorus. As you walk, notice the contrast between the stillness here and the wild tailies. You might have heard of gold fever. This place seems untouched by such urgency. It is a sanctuary of patience, of waiting and watching. The hurried voices and clatter of tools have faded into the background of history, leaving only the soft chorus of natural sounds and the slow passage of sunlight through the leaves. Imagine sitting on a flat rock beside the water, the coolness of the stone grounding you. The river's gentle current pulls your attention away from the rush of modern life. You might hear the distant call of a woodpecker tapping rhythmically against a tree, or the soft buzz of insects hidden among the ferns. Each sound is measured, deliberate, part of a slower pace that invites calm. Breathe deeply again, noticing the way the air carries the scent of wet earth, pine resin, and perhaps the faintest trace of wild herbs. Imagine the sensation of cool mist rising from the river's surface in the early morning, brushing lightly against your face like a whispered greeting. The world here moves in quiet cycles, dawn to dusk, season to season, guided by the rhythm of nature rather than human ambition. Now, imagine the earth beneath your feet holds more than soil and stone. Beneath the surface lie the remnants of hope and toil, the faint traces of campsites long abandoned, shallow shafts dug in hurried bursts, and caches of tools left behind when miners moved on. The ground is a silent witness to countless untold stories, stories of lives lived close to the land and its fragile bounty. In the hush of this place, imagine the stillness stretching back through decades, centuries even, to the fevered rush of 1849 when thousands flocked here chasing dreams. Picture the difference between then and now. From the noise and chaos of clanging picks and shouting men, to the quiet patience of wind in the pines and water over stone. The river that once carried the gleam of gold now carries only reflection of sky, trees, and time itself. As you sit quietly, let the slow pace and gentle sounds guide your thoughts. Imagine how the world has changed, and yet how it remains the same, how the gold that once drew so many remains hidden, tucked beneath layers of earth and water, waiting in silence. The mystery is not only in what was lost, but in what remains untouched by haste or greed. Feel the weight of this stillness, like a soft blanket, settling over your shoulders. The land does not rush. It invites you to slow down, to breathe, to simply be. Imagine the river's gentle murmur as a lullaby, the soft rustling leaves as a whispered secret. This is the quiet heart of lost gold troves, a place where time folds softly and stories rest patiently beneath the surface. Imagine yourself rising gently, feeling the cool moss beneath your hands one last time before you step back onto the soft earth, with each step away from the water's edge. Carry this calm with you, a quiet understanding that not all treasures are found in gold, but in the peace of a place held quietly by time. As you continue your gentle journey through the quiet landscapes of the old gold rush country, your mind might naturally wander toward the stories that swirl like mist around these hills and rivers, whispered over campfires passed between generations, stories that have taken on a life of their own. These are the stories of lost gold troves, hidden caches, buried in haste or secreted away with hope and fear, treasures left behind when the fever of the rush finally cooled. Imagine yourself settling down once again, perhaps beside a crackling fire under a darkening sky, the stars beginning to twinkle faintly overhead. You listen to the low murmur of voices, miners' voices from long ago, or perhaps their echoes in the rustle of the trees telling tales that blend fact and fancy, truth and longing. The air smells faintly of smoke and pine, the night wrapped softly around you as these stories unfold. One of the oldest tales speaks of miners who, gripped by sudden danger, or the threat of claim jumpers hurriedly buried their gold in shallow pits or deep crevices, marking their hiding places with subtle Cinzan arrangement of stones, a notch carved into a tree, or a small pile of broken branches. These were desperate measures taken in moments of fear or uncertainty, when the precious metal in their hands had to be concealed until safer times. Imagine the miner's heart pounding as he hurriedly digs, the cold earth pressing against his fingers, the weight of gold heavy in his palms, and the uncertainty gnawing at his thoughts. Would the mark he left be enough to find the stash again? Or would the treasure be swallowed by time, forgotten, and lost forever? These stories are not merely romantic. They reflect real challenges faced during the gold rush. Claim jumpers, who might steal a miner's hard-won ground, unpredictable violence, and the harsh wilderness that forced many to abandon possessions in their flight. The very landscape itself was both a treasure trove, and a trap dense forest could obscure hiding places. Rivers shift their courses, and years of rain and growth could erase any sign of a secret cache. But as you listen carefully, you notice how these stories often grow and change, shaped by retellings and the passage of time. There are tales of great fortunes, hidden away bags of gold coins, buried beneath old oaks, chests sunk into riverbeds, or stashes concealed behind waterfalls. Some speak of lost maps faded and torn, held only in the memories of old prospectors whose lips have long since gone silent. Yet for every tale of hidden gold, there are quiet realities to consider. Most miners were not wealthy men who could afford to bury treasures and return at leisure. Gold was their livelihood, a necessity to be spent on supplies, shelter, and survival. The idea of large, forgotten hoards is often more fantasy than fact, a reflection of human hope more than the history of the rush. Imagine a careful archaeologist, years later, stepping softly into these same hills, combing the earth not with the frantic energy of a prospector, but with patience and precision. Their work uncovers shards of tools, fragments of campsites, and the occasional coin or nugget, but no vast hidden caches. Instead, what they find is evidence of hard lives churned by people, the slow rebuilding of abandoned claims, and the traces of homes built from driftwood and canvas. In fact, many so-called lost troves turn out to be little more than the accumulated detritus of hurried living. Items buried or lost in the chaos of mining, life-broken pans, rusted nails, worn boots sometimes mistaken for treasure. The real gold lies in the stories, the artifacts, and the landscape itself, holding the imprint of human endeavor and nature's quiet resilience. Now, let us turn to a few of the well-known legends, those that live on not because of confirmed riches but because of the dreams they inspire. One such tale tells of a miner named Jedediah, who in 1852 supposedly hid his gold deep within a cave along a remote river bend before disappearing without a trace. For decades, treasure hunters sought this cave, spurred by cryptic letters and old maps passed down in families. The cave was found many years later, empty except for some faded tools and a weathered leather pouch containing nothing more than a handful of old coins. The gold was never recovered, and some say it was never there at all. That Jedediah's real treasure was a life lived on the edge, lost to time like the cave's shadows. Another story comes from the tale of the Silver Sisters, two women who reportedly secreted away their earnings beneath the floorboards of a cabin in the High Sierra. When the cabin burned in a late autumn fire, the location was forgotten for years until a local historian stumbled upon remnants of the foundation. Inside, no gold or silver was found, but instead, personal letters and faded photographs that spoke quietly of courage and survival in a harsh land. These legends, whether true or not, invite us to imagine the human side of the gold rush, the hopes, fears, and quiet acts of preservation amid uncertainty. They remind us that treasure is not always a chest of metal, but sometimes the memories and lives etched quietly into the landscape. As the night deepens and the fire dwindles to embers, consider the patience required to live in this land. Gold rush stories often focus on sudden strikes and quick fortunes, but the reality was more often slow, steady work, and careful choices. The land keeps its secrets, not because they are hidden behind clever traps, but because time itself is the greatest guardian. Allow yourself to rest in this thought, that some treasures are not meant to be found quickly or all at once. Some are scattered like leaves on a forest floor, fragments that, when gathered gently, tell a deeper story of endurance and change. As you let your gaze soften and your breath slow, imagine these tales as gentle echoes carried on the wind. The gold that was lost may remain hidden, but its story is always present, waiting to be heard by those who listen with patience and care. Imagine yourself returning to the river's edge, The water glides over smooth stones, steady and unhurried. In the hush of dawn, you feel the river's steady presence, always moving, yet always the same. Its soft murmurs speak of time rather than urgency. Gold, though born in fire and buried deep beneath the earth, often traveled into these quiet places, not by miners, but by the gentle persistence of water and sediment. This is the story of alluvial gold that moves in hush rather than shout, reshaped and carried by forces far beyond human control. Over the decades, the rivers here have changed course, not abruptly but steadily, bank by bank, meander by slow meander. Seasonal floods, when they arrive, sweep across wide plains, inundating old riverbeds, and carving away banks in subtle, relentless fashion. Picture a spring flood. The river rises, swelling with snowmelt from distant mountains. Its waters thick with silk. Tree trunks, branches, and stones drift on its surface. The current thunders in spots, but, more often, it flows like a broad, muddy whisper across the valley floor. Underneath these floods lie changes, invisible to the eye. Where the water gathers, the flow slows. The heavier gold flecks, once carried with ease, settle into new pockets behind boulders, among bedrock out, beneath layers of freshly dropped sediment. A narrow creek that miners once panned may now lie dry or hidden under thick grass and debris. What once was rich with showy flakes can be washed away and scattered, lost to the gentle erosion of the valley. Let's explore the science of alluvial gold, quiet, patient, shaped by stillness and motion alike. Gold is dense, about 19 times heavier than water. That means it behaves differently from lighter sediment. When water flows fast, it hums away fine materials, silt, sand, clay, but leaves heavier particles behind. Over time, as water speed fluctuates, rising with floods, ebbing later, the dynamics of deposition change. Imagine swirling water around a stone, creating a miniature whirlpool. As the current slows behind the rock, gold flakes, unable to resist gravity, drift down and settle in that calm eddy. Over months, years, decades, these pockets fill, layer upon layer, hidden beneath sands and pebbles, sometimes only inches from ancient campsite remains. Rivers shift laterally, to carving banks and depositing debris along the way. What was once a gold-laden bank may now be several feet above the current waterline, buried beneath vegetation and soil. In other spots, old riverbeds lie 20 feet below the present surface, completely hidden. When 50 years old, a miner might draw a line on his battered map, marking gold here. But such a map, sketched hurriedly in a cabin on the edge of the creek, had a lifespan shorter than the lifespan of the river. Over time, the map's landmarks, trees, boulders, the course of the creek fade or vanish. That stately oak used as a reference may topple in a storm. A rock outcrop might be covered by shifting soil. A creek may have carved a new channel, leaving the old one dry and unrecognizable. When later prospectors return, even with a map, they often find only the echo of gold. The river has moved. The ground has risen or sunk. Even a few feet of difference can bury the treasure beyond reach, locked behind hidden sediment layers and reshaped earth. It reshapes narratives and alters expectations. Walk into a woodland now thick with undergrowth. Let your footfall stir the leaf litter in soft soil. Below your feet, small rivulets may form in the rain, carrying fine silt to unseen places. Roots may have cracked open rock veins, revealing glimpses of quartz or occasional sparkle where microscopic gold rests. In some areas, erosion has cut deep gullies. Old sluice channels once dug by miners, now filled with storm debris and branches. These silent grooves hold water during heavy rain, and sometimes glint with a stray flake when the light aligns just so. Yet they are decoys as much as clues, reminders of how much has changed. All these transformations fold into the allure of hidden gold troves. An abandoned claim is never truly abandoned. It is just waiting beneath layers of earth-rooted vegetation and centuries of quiet sediment. The very changes that obscure gold's resting places also protect them. A silver lining to nature's shifting landscape is the sense that discovery is still possible even after all this time. Imagine a new prospector sitting by the river at dawn, dusting aside fallen leaves, revealing a patch of sand that looks different. Pausing, they brush away a few pebbles, and they're a glimmer. Or think of archaeologists finding an old mining site now hidden beneath a forest canopy. Their tools are not picks driven by urgency, but small brushes and sieves, unearthing old tailings, mining debris, lost tools, and maybe, just maybe, a flake of gold nestled deep beneath centuries of cover. These natural changes are not harsh. They are patient. Erosion and sedimentation unfold slowly, like pages turning in a book, yet they hide many pages before revealing them again. In this landscape, loss and accumulation coexist. Layers hold stories, some buried shallow, others deeply. The past is always just beneath the surface. The history of mining doesn't end when a claim is filed or abandoned. It continues in every shift of soil and water. In every storm, rainwater reopens bedrock seams, sometimes washing free new alluvial dust, or clearing roots enough to reveal a forgotten digging pit. Now, imagine standing at the water's edge again. The river murmurs with ancient patience. Its voice is steady. You, too, may feel steady, aware that the landscape holds meaning far deeper than human plans. All these forces, floods, erosion, river course changes, they create a mystery that is both geographical and emotional. Geographical, because the land physically transforms, pushing markers beyond memory, reshaping the places we thought we knew. Emotional, because the urge to understand, to find, to connect, remains alive. Even without gold, we search. We reach into a hidden world beneath our feet. In sleep-friendly narration, we find solace in this quiet mystery. Like a half-remembered dream, these landscapes whisper that gold may still rest somewhere beneath the silent soil. There is no rush, no pressure to discover, only the gentle possibility of revelation, of understanding more about history, about how the earth reshapes everything we thought permanent. In imagining gold waiting patiently below, we are invited to pause and listen to the river, the wind, and the slow turn of seasons. As you drift between wakefulness and rest, allow yourself to breathe in the mystery. Picture the forest stillness, the river's constant flow, the slow movement of sediment. Know that beneath your feet lie layers of history, of hope, and of nature's patient recalibration. Gold chased by men long ago may now be silent, but the landscape holds it softly, in ways those miners could not imagine. And in the hush, we find not just gold's physical weight, but the weight of curiosity and time steadily worn away. Imagine once more this gently flowing river, the light soft as it filters through treesock pine and willow alec, casting long, quiet shadows across the ground. Here, where grasses sway and moss crowds riverbanks, archaeologists tread softly, bringing tools not of steam or gunpowder, but of patience, brushes, trowels, measuring tapes, and notebooks. Their silent work unfolds like the unrolling of a slow, deliberate story. In recent decades, interest in mining archaeology has grown quietly but steadily. University teams and historical societies began revisiting old mining claims, places once thought exhausted or lost, to document what remained. Unlike the traditional rush to extract wealth, their aim was different: preservation, understanding, and respectful investigation. These efforts often begin with careful research, consulting old maps, diaries, land surveys, and miners' journals. Then, they move to the field quietly, gently, with a sense that each footprint might uncover a story. Brush in hand, an archaeologist moves slowly across an eroded hillside, sweeping away leaf litter, examining the earth beneath. The forest stillness is broken only by soft tapping wood vibrating against metal, then dust falling away in fine, traitorous dust. It starts with small things: an iron spike, a rusted nail, part of a once bright pan. Each fragment comes with a soft echo of history. Pickaxe fragments, often found near old shafts, handles long rotted away, leaving behind the steel heads, the tools of endless hope. Tin cups and plates, dented, yet still recognizable evidence of meals eaten beside flickering campfires, conversations shared in fleeting moments. Buttons and buckles, tiny yet telling, their designs reflecting the fashions carried by miners among their meager belongings. Fragments of glass bottles, medicine, spirits, cooking, oil, quiet clues to the routines, comforts, or dependencies of camp life. Imagine dust brushed away bit by bit from a small leather pouch. It may have held coins, few and worn, or a personal token. Each item, handled with gloved hands, catalogued gently in a notebook, numbered, wrapped, stored like a treasure whose weight is not in gold, but in memory. In some cases, entire features of camps are uncovered: stone foundations of makeshift cabins, rock cairns or low walls that once supported roofs of driftwood, the outlines still discernible beneath ferns and leaf mold. Sluice box remnants, timbers buried in gravel, channels carved into bedrock, evidence of the ingenuity used to process sediment. Campfire hearths, circular depressions ringed by stones, stained black with old carbon in some. Careful testers find fish scales or chicken bones, hinting at meals shared long ago. Glass thermometer fragments, reflective of early efforts to monitor conditions, or comfort in knowing the day's warmth. Each find is small and unassuming, yet altogether, they form a mosaic of daily life, far from glamorous, but rich in quiet humanity. Picture the archaeologist on a cool morning. Mist swirls around the trees, a slender brush sweeps soil from a nail. The soft rasp of bristles, the silence, the cold. These moments are careful negotiations between past and present. As the excavation progresses, the true value of these finds emerge. But lived experience, a corroded tin mug, post-excavation polished lightly, reflects a campsite morning. Patterns of discarded bottle fragments suggest where water was fetched or whiskey consumed. Broken tools show where repairs were frequent, handles replaced again and again, dents fixed as best they could be. These discoveries provide context not only what miners did, but how they lived, their movements, their meals, their adaptations to cold nights, scarcity, and isolation. Recorded field notes trace the placement of items. A spoon near a hearth, a rusted pan tip beside a sluice, a fragment of a board leaning against a rock. Each placement tells a story of convenience, habit, use. Today, modern prospectors and archaeologists sometimes use careful technology. Imagine a drone's soft hum overhead, scanning, feeding back maps of the ground bare of leaves revealing old cuts, stream diversions, and trails, or radar pulses sent gently through earth, reflecting subtle changes in soil density, allowing archaeologists to see buried features before a single shovel breaks the surface. These tools are not used for extraction, but for understanding, for preserving history, for tracing the quiet patterns in the land shaped by human hands. Ground-penetrating radar might expose an outline of a cabin platform. LIDAR can map sluice lines hidden beneath forest canopy. Drones can compare current and historical imagery, showing how a river has shifted what may have carried valuables off into hidden depths. All of this is done gently, with a light touch ethos born from respect for both history and environment. No blush, no invasive digging except in carefully controlled test squares. When an artifact emerges, say, a flake of gold still nestled in quartzite, is handled slowly. It is washed with distilled water, photographed, wrapped in acid-free paper, and logged precisely. Date, location, depth, context. Even a single coin carries several layers of meaning. These artifacts are then stored carefully, sometimes in local museums, historical societies, or university archives. There they await researchers, exhibits, and contemplative visitors who may touch the surface of history in quiet reflection. The items speak softly, but they speak. A piece of a pan, a rusted pick handle, a tin kapau are witnesses. They whisper of dents and repairs, long nights spent cooking over embers, bandages sewn hastily for minor wounds, tools battered by heavy stone and relentless cold. Researchers to become part of the landscape. Picture an archaeologist standing with clients by an old creek bed at dusk. She explains the pattern of bone and bottle fragments, lighting soft flood lamps in twilight, preparing for a camp dinner, perhaps stew cooked in a Dutch oven. Conversations hushed, history unfolding. They speak of the emotions of uncovering a rusted pan that once warmed someone's soup. They describe the care needed to handle a tiny, fragile bullet, a possible relic of a dispute, now cold and still. They speak of wonder not at treasure sparkle, but at the weight of ordinary lives. Balanced alongside archaeology is ethical, modern prospecting done not for profit, but for exploration. Amateur prospectors may test rivers with pans and sluice boxes, hoping to find small flakes. Many are careful to refill test holes, to respect private land, to report finds so they may be preserved rather than plundered. Some groups call themselves heritage prospectors. They view gold pans and sluice boxes as tools that connect to the past, not for wealth, but for education. They uncover not riches, but understanding. Their discovery is an iron wheel rim, a rusty nailer logged, photographed, sometimes shared online, with notes on context and history. No one hurries. No one speculates wildly. Instead, there is respect and acknowledgement that this land has stories older than gold fever. Imagine arriving in the field at dawn. The air is sharp. Mist lifts from the creek. Tent zippers whisper open. A kettle is lit. You cup your hands around a warm mug of coffee, the steam threading soft rings into the cool air. Trowel picks at topsoil. Dust motes swirl in the sun's early rays. A thin brush moves slowly, flicking away debris in gentle arcs. Dirt discs, the faint grimace of a miner's ring, a cobalt blue gem set in silver. The sound is silence, punctuated by faint knocks. A tool tapping stone, a shovel flicking earth, the settling of boards in an empty cabin foundation. These archaeological discoveries do more than reconstruct camps. They reconnect us with human rhythms. The clink of a shovel dropped at day's end, the steam curling from a morning cup, a fellow miner's jacket snagging on a namatag button. The gold itself may be gone, but the artifacts fill a gap not in our bellies but in our understanding. They tell of adaptation, endurance, and quiet hope. Now, as the sun begins its descent and the field winds down, imagine archaeologists packing gently, trowels rinsed, finds secured, the site covered carefully to rest again under moss and leaf. The river continues to murmur. The forest returns to quiet. But beneath the surface, beneath the soil, the roots, the grass lie traces of human life. Not fortune's gold, but something deeper. The small moments that shape lives. As you drift toward rest, let these quiet discoveries comfort you. Treasure is not always bright or loud. It can be small, ordinary, yet deeply meaningful. And in these hushed finds, we find a different kind of richness. The firelight has long since faded, and night settles quietly over these hills, where once the sounds of miners' hopes and labors filled the air. Now only the whisper of wind through pine needles remains. But even in this silence, the land holds memories. Not in words, but in things. In the scattered remains, that time has softened, but not erased. If you walk slowly along a creek bed, you might notice a wooden beam, half buried and darkened by rain and moss. This was once part of a sluice box, a simple wooden channel where water and gravel rushed, sorting tiny flecks of gold from earth and stone. Now abandoned, softened by decades of weather, it lies quietly where it fell. Nearby, a rusted tin, its label faded to near invisibility, may serve as a planter for wildflowers. Perhaps a hiker placed soil inside it, tucked in a few small blooms, yellow petals catching the afternoon sun. The tin was once a container for a miner's meal, a humble vessel in the long days of toil. Tiny shards of glass still glint faintly in the dust along forgotten paths. Remnants of lanterns that once lit cabins and camps at night. Imagine their gentle flicker in the darkness. Small flames casting wavering shadows over weary faces. Now the glass lies harmless, dulled and scattered, silent witnesses to a time long past. Modern archaeologists return again and again to these hills, searching carefully for the subtle traces of the past. They find outlines of mining camps swallowed by forest, rectangular clearings where cabins once stood, stone hearths blackened with soot, timbers half buried in soil. Each discovery tells of lives lived close to the earth, built with whatever materials were at hand. Flattened crates, rough-hewn planks, stones packed with mud. Even deeper in the woods, hidden from ease of view, are the remains of Chinese mining villages. These communities were often built in quiet hollows, on steep slopes, where others did not settle. Stone foundations remain carefully squared, small ovens blackened with the memory of countless meals, and porcelain shards, delicate fragments of blue and white cups that crossed oceans to bring comfort far from home. Ink stones and calligraphy brushes, altars once scented with incense. These speak softly of culture kept alive despite distance and hardship. Sometimes, the earth yields more personal treasures. Child's boot, worn and cracked, its leather now as rough as bark. Who walked in it? A boy or girl who once ran beside the river, or sat quietly by the fire, waiting for beans to cook in a tin can. No one knows the name, but the small shuru remains a tender echo of a life once lived. In one remarkable find, a ledger book surfaced from the soil near Nevada City. Its water-damaged pages recorded debts, flour, tobacco, rope, whiskey, ordinary items, bought and traded, each line marked with names or initials and dates. This ledger holds no grand stories of riches or fame, only the quiet realities of everyday survival. The cost of bread, the promise of a shared bottle, the simple business of living in a place far from home. Scattered throughout the hills are countless small objects, a clay pot, a comb missing teeth, a bent spoon, a leather pouch with faded stitching. None shout for attention, none declare their owner's importance, but they remain humble witnesses to daily lives, not heroes or villains, but people who lived, worked, and hoped. The past, you see, does not vanish. It settles gently, like dust in forgotten corners, like stones beneath flowing water, like gold waiting quietly at the bottom of an old pan. These hills hold an archive note of grand triumphs, but of quiet rhythms, ordinary lives, and the steady passage of time. And so, when you walk here, listen softly for their stories, not told in loud voices or shining trophies, but in what's softened by rain, in porcelain fragments, in rusted tins, blooming with flowers, and the earth beneath your feet, a faithful keeper of memories. What we forget, the earth remembers, not loudly, not clearly, but always, gently. Imagine, as the sunset slowly fades behind the majestic Sierra Nevada mountains, nature begins its patient work, a slow, peaceful process stretching over decades, even centuries. It is how the land heals the wounds left by human hands, yet also how it quietly preserves memories without words. Strong trunks rise, covering the pits and streams filled in by the weary labor of miners long ago. The rustling leaves whisper softly in the breeze, as if nature is gently telling stories of a past long gone. Flowers grow on land that once witnessed exhaustion, waiting, and fragile hopes of those who dreamed of gold. The trees, those towering green giants, gradually grow, sending their roots deep into the soil. The water carries sediment and tiny stones downstream, renewing the earth, bringing lushness and life back again. The river winds and bends through the valleys, quietly smoothing the rough scars left by years of digging, like a lullaby sung to the hills. The streams that once cut through hills run clear again, blending back into the wilderness as if human hands never disturbed them. Every rock, every tree stands as a loyal witness, recording the marks, movements, cold dawns draped in fog, and gloomy evenings after long, tiring days. Every radiant poppy is a gentle reminder of the lives once lived here. Where once stood makeshift tents and crowded camps, now bloom vast fields of poppies, radiant beneath the golden sun. These are quiet tales from another time, unassuming but profound. You might discover old bricks, fragments of porcelain, or tiny children escalos. In piles of dirt, it is a place where past and present merge, coexisting in peaceful harmony, sharing a space that is calm yet full of life. And stones, faint traces of communities that once lived, struggled, and hoped. Those memories never fully disappear. They are carried and protected by the earth and trees, by the wind and water, by time itself. Each small object is like a letter from the past, telling of the long days miners endured, the cold nights beside fires, and the misty mornings, and disappointments, buried deep beneath soft earth, mingling with leaves and the gentle wind. It is both an artist, skillfully cloaking scars with a fresh green coat, and a guardian, quietly preserving traces of the past. Nature is a silent librarian, patient yet powerful. It does not rush, does not judge, but slowly holds all the memories of people, their stories, dreams. Beneath that soil, one might find broken pottery shards, rusty nails, spent bullets, or old tools, and the everlasting nature, the final keeper of history's treasures. But if you listen closely enough, you can feel the gentle breath of the land, the swaying grass, and the whispering wind, all softly telling a slow, peaceful, and deeply emotional story. You might not hear the cheerful laughter or urgent calls of those old mining camps. Many old mines have long been swallowed by nature. Paths have worn away with time, and old pits are now hidden beneath roots and thick brush. Yet beneath this calm surface, memories remain. Forests have regrown over what were once small Chinese immigrant villages, now forgotten amid birdsong and falling leaves. In this stillness, the land becomes a silent archive, an open library anyone can explore if they know how to listen and watch. Though the gold is gone, and the stories of weary days and distant hopes may be forgotten, the hills still shimmer, with silence, with story, and with time. This is the soothing quiet you can feel as you lie in your room, wrapped in warmth, thinking of a world long past, a world of persistence, ordinary people, and patient nature. You might imagine that beneath this quiet surface, life continues, just in a different way, slower, deeper. And as you close your eyes, let yourself drift into rest with gentle thoughts of silent hills, blooming poppy fields. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Sierra Nevada, a vast and ancient mountain range, stretching far beyond the horizon. The air here is cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something quietly enduring time itself. In winter, the mountains are cloaked in snow, a thick, quiet blanket that muffles sound and smooths the edges of rocks and ridges. The snow falls silently, like a slow dance of tiny white feathers drifting from the gray sky. Imagine the cool hush settling over the forests and valleys. The only sound, the distant crack of ice forming on a frozen stream. As you breathe in deeply, you notice the subtle rhythm that moves through this landscape, steady and unhurried like the slow heartbeat of the earth. The sharp taps of pine and fir mingles with the fresh, cold air, and the quiet seems to stretch endlessly, as if the mountains themselves are holding their breath. This unhurried pace is nature's way of keeping time, a rhythm that has echoed for countless generations. The sun warms the rocky slopes and dry meadows, and the scent of wild sage and dry pine fills the air. The sound of cicadas hums steadily in the background, a soothing, repetitive drone that feels like a natural lullaby. A gentle breeze stirs the branches overhead, causing the needles to rustle softly, like whispered secrets shared among old friends. The days stretch long and warm, with the golden hues of grasses shimmering softly in the afternoon breeze. The mountains seem to lean back, resting after a full season of growth and light. The wildflowers fade, their petals drying and falling, but their seeds remain scattered like quiet promises carried on the wind. Sometimes, it smooths out the rough scars left by human hands, moss growing thick over abandoned digging, wildflowers blooming where tents once stood, rivers washing away the sharp edges of old minings. It softens the past's sharp angles with green moss and fragrant pine, while cradling fragments of memory in the soil, the rocks, and the twisting roots of ancient trees. It moves with a steady, calming patience that reminds us of the slow passage of time. At other times, it preserves the faintest imprint of a boot or a rusted nail, keeping these quiet memories hidden just beneath the surface. Feel the timeless pulse of the land beneath your feet, steady, calm, and enduring. Mushrooms peek out from under fallen logs, and small animals scurry quietly among the underbrush. The warm greens of summer give way to gentle yellows, oranges, and browns. Leaves flutter down softly, carpeting the forest floor in a patchwork of rustling paper. The air cools and takes on the scent of dry earth and pine resin, mingling with a faint hint of wood smoke drifting from distant cabins. The land seems alive in a calm, watchful way, neither rushing nor resting, simply existing in its steady, ancient flow. The rivers swell slowly with the thaw, their waters murmuring gently as they wind through the valleys and carve new paths among old rocks. The air carries a new sweetness, mingled with the crisp freshness of pine and the faint musk of moss growing on shaded boulders. Pines, cedars, and firs stand tall and steady, their dark green needles whispering softly with each breeze. Imagine the soil beneath your feet as a vast library, layered with the imprints of countless footsteps, the hurried steps of miners, the careful tread of settlers, the wandering trails of animals. The forest floor is a mosaic of soft needles, fallen cones, and scattered leaves, all gently pressed underfoot. You might hear the soft rush of water over stones, a calming sound that speaks of renewal and gentle change. The scent of wet earth rises, thick with the promise of growth. This is a time when the land gathers strength, conserving its energy beneath the white stillness. The Sierra Nevada shifts gently through the seasons, each one a soft layer woven into the fabric of the land's long story. Beneath that snow, the land sleeps. Trees stand bare or bowed beneath their heavy coats, their needles coated with frost that sparkles faintly in the pale sunlight. Then, as spring arrives, the snow begins to melt, wildflowers begin to awaken, small bursts of color pushing up through the moist soil, delicate lupins with their pale purple petals, bright yellow poppies, and shy ferns unfurling their soft fronds. The trees themselves grow slowly, their branches stretching upward in a patient reach for the sunlight. Throughout the spring, the land breathes a quiet rhythm. The river flows steadily. The flowers bloom and fade. The trees grow a little taller. By summer, the Sierra Nevada shines in full light. Imagine walking through a meadow where butterflies drift lazily from flower to flower, their wings flickering like tiny flames in the sunlight. In the shaded woods, the air is cooler and carries the faint, earthy smell of decaying leaves and rich soil. Then, as autumn arrives, the landscape begins to slow again. The rivers slow and grow quieter, their waters darkening under cloudy skies. Through all these changes, the land remains a silent witness, a patient, unhurried archivist of everything that has passed across its surface. The Sierra Nevada breathes deeply and slowly, Nature is both eraser and keeper of history. As you listen to the rustling leaves, the murmuring streams, and the whisper of the wind through the pines, imagine yourself part of this endless story. The mountains stand quietly, holding their stories close, waiting for you to wander through them, to listen, and to dream. Now, let us linger with the land. Not as it once was, but as it gently becomes. When people leave, nature does not hurry. It does not rush to reclaim what was lost, nor does it grieve what was done. Instead, it begins, quietly and patiently, to restore itself. Grain by grain, root by root. Imagine a narrow stream threading through an old claim. Once, this water was diverted, dammed, and choked with debris in pursuit of gold. Just the persistent hush of water moving over stone. Steady, faithful, constant. It washes away more than soil. It smooths out the stories left behind, making room for others. Sluices had been hammered into the banks, and picks dug into the soil, disrupting its course. But, over time, the wooden frames rotted, the iron fittings rusted. Storms came, small floods rose and fell again. Each time the waters overflowed, they carried silt and stone, slowly refilling the hollowed pits left behind by men. The rough cuts in the earth soft. Nature doesn't rebuild what was lost, it transforms. Imagine walking through one in early June. The sun is high but not harsh. The air is warm but edged with the coolness of mountain elevation. All around you, colors shimmer. They grow from the soil enriched by fallen timbers and broken tools. What was once a mining camp is now a cradle of delicate life. The past isn't erased. It's overgrown. First come the mosses and lichens, dressing stone and wood in a soft, living skin. Their scent is faint, dusty sweet like linen stored too long. Bears and deer follow the same trails, once trod by carts and pack mules. Squirrels stash acorns in the hollow of what was once a stovepipe. Life weaves itself into the old latticework of industry and ambition, unmaking and remaking the past. Interspersed you find California poppies, their orange petals folded gently in the morning dew, waiting for the warmth to open them wide. Others are patient species, Douglas fir, incense cedar, sugar pine trees that take decades to reach maturity, but will tower for centuries. Beneath them, manzanita and snowberry creep slowly outward. The process is slow. It cannot be hurried, but it is inevitable. It rises not with ambition, but with calm persistence. Yarrow, goldenrod, and paintbrush add texture and contrast, not in years, but in growth rings, not in days, but in the spreading of moss, the widening of tree trunks, the slow reclaiming of stone by lichen. And nature does not resent. It accepts. The forest embraces what remains and simply continues on. Silence is not emptiness. It is fullness of a different kind. The land is full of wind, water, roots, and memory. The signs of habitation become less and less until only the forest remains, tall, silent, and alive. What it cannot erase, it enfolds. What it cannot hide, it buries beneath beauty. But they will soften, fade, and fall quiet. Under pine needles, under moss, under centuries of returning green. Then the ferns, unfurling like slow green scrolls in the moisture. Shrubs follow, then trees, and then, after many years, a forest stands again. Trails, once worn hard under boots, soften under leaves. Paths that led to tents or cook fires are swallowed by brambles. A hiker might step on a buried coin or rusted buckle, not knowing the footsteps they echo. Edges once sharp with urgency blurred into genteel slopes. The river, once redirected, found its own rhythm again. Erasing maps drawn by hand, these young shoots find their place between broken walls and split foundations. They do not ask permission. Each season, the cracks widen. Ivy drapes over what's left, hiding beams beneath green tendrils. What once was man's becomes something else. A perch for birds, a den for foxes, a frame for a blooming vine. The sound of this process is not loud. There are no crashing waves, deep below, layers tell stories. Not in words, but in sediment and root. Charcoal from forgotten fires, iron from old tools, pollen from plants, long gone. All that now is silence. Roofs caved in long ago, under the weight of snow and time. Shingles turned to mulch, nails rusted into brittle spirals, and all the while, roots pushed forward. Beyond the creeks, the forest does its own quiet work. Picture a ghost town once bustling, the echo of boots on wooden porches, the clatter of hammers, the hiss of pots over fires. The first trees to return are often light and quick. Alder, willow, birch, their seeds carried by wind or bird, drifting into forgotten corners and sprouting in the dark soil of abandoned gardens. Their roots press into stone, slowly prying apart the remains of cellars and bunk. This is the process of ecological succession. It happens everywhere, but here in the Sierra Nevada, it has its own ancient rhythm. Sometimes, a clearing remains, a flat place, where tents once clustered, or wagons circled. These open spaces become meadows, rich with wildflowers. There are pale blue lupins, clustered like tiny candles. These flowers return each year, not in the exact same places, but always in their season. And as decades pass, even the memories fade. Old roads vanish beneath a carpet of needles. Fire rings become stones scattered at random. From a distance, nothing seems unusual. Trees grow where trees have always grown, but the soil remembers. Even the wildlife returns. Birds nest in beams of collapsed cabins. Some of the returning plants are pioneers, sprouting quickly in disturbed ground. Time, in these forests, is measured differently. Every scar the earth has known, every trench, every clearing, every structure is given back. Eventually, to the slow hands of nature. Even sound changes here. The hammering, shouting, and roaring carts have given way to the rustle of leaves, the chirr of insects, the flutter of wings. And so, the Sierra Nevada becomes its own archivist, not through paper or maps, but through gentle restoration. The footprints of those who once sought fortune here will never truly disappear. The gold may be long gone, but life returns in cycles. It roots itself deep in the same soil that was once scraped and strained. What was once a place of noise becomes a cathedral of stillness. What was torn open is now closed over, and what was forgotten is remembered in a different way. Not by names or stories, but by lupins blooming each spring. The land remembers, beneath the quiet hush of wind through grass, and the muted crunch of footsteps on uneven earth. It holds stories, not in words or images, but in the stubborn persistence of objects buried long ago. To walk through these landscapes is to step into a half-told narrative, where each fragment unearthed from the soil speaks softly of lives once lived, of toil, of hope, of the slow passing of days. Archaeologists do not chase spectacle. Their work, often methodical and slow, unfolds like a careful conversation with the past, one in which the land itself speaks, not loudly, but with patience. Though much of the structure had rotted away, a few planks remained intact, preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the mud. Their roof-hewn grain bore the marks of hand tools, and traces of iron nails, now rusted to a deep orange, clung to their edges. This was no casual construction. It was a tool of necessity, central to the process of separating gold from gravel. Its presence transforms the surrounding slope from a quiet hill into a place of human endeavor, echoing with the splash of water and the scrape of metal on stone. Wind-blown dust, seasonal floods, and the slow growth of vegetation weave a protective blanket, sealing away the artifacts like pages in a long-buried book. The tilt of a bottle, the angle of a buried beam, the scatter of ash or nails. Each detail offers clues. Archaeologists read these like lines in a palimpsest, tracing layers of time, piecing together not just what happened, but how people lived. The site becomes a layered map of choices and chances, of what was kept and what was left behind. They are not relics of greatness, but testaments to the people who left them behind may not have known their names would fade, that their struggles would dissolve into silence, but they left marks, nonetheless, honest, tangible signs that they were here, that they worked, hoped, struggled, and lived. In anaerobic pockets, where air does not easily reach, wood can remain intact for decades, even centuries. In dry, sandy soils, metal corrodes slowly, allowing the shape of tools or cans to persist. Glass, nearly impervious, often lies as it was dropped, catching the light once more when disturbed. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, dented, rust-streaked, and partially collapsed. One piece bore a faint floral pattern, its colors muted but still visible beneath the grime. The ground is uneven, shaped by old foundations and collapsed walls. You pause, kneeling to brush aside moss, and there, a piece of glass, cool and smooth, in your palm. Around you, the land holds its breath. The past is not gone. It's simply sleeping, wrapped in loam and stone, waiting for someone to listen. You might spot a sliver of ceramic caught in a tree root, or the ghostly outline of a footpath worn long ago. There's a stillness here, not of emptiness, but of waiting. The earth remembers, even when we do not. It might have been lost in haste, or discarded when broken, its handle long since taken together. They illuminate the texture of daily life in a way grand monuments cannot. They speak of the ordinary, of work done in silence, of meals shared in rough cabins, of weariness and determination, of small comforts and unspoken dreams. There's humility in these objects, and power. They do not shout, they simply endure. Held in hand, it feels solid, purposeful, weighted with the memory of labor. It is a direct link to the hands that swung it, day after day, into the stubborn earth. That it lay undisturbed for more than a century is a quiet marvel. These were not fine ceramics, but everyday crockery, bowls, perhaps, or a teapot. Their presence suggests domesticity, the effort to maintain a sense of normal life in a raw and provisional setting. That someone took care to bring patterned pottery into such a rugged place speaks to hope, to the desire for beauty and familiarity amidst the starkness. But closer examination revealed faint traces of embossed lettering, suggesting it once held tobacco. Its presence, buried in a layer of earth dated to the mid-1800s, offers a glimpse of a solitary moment, taking a pause, rolling a cigarette, gazing out across the muddy valley. The tin is not just a container, it's a fragment of routine, of brief comfort, of the small rituals that tethered these men to something human amid the hard labor of their days. In a windswept gully or along the banks of a silt-choked stream, the soil gives up its secrets. A rusted tin, shards of thick glass, the worn edge of a broken tool. Ordinary things, perhaps, but in their ordinariness lies something extraordinary. These are the pieces left behind, the overlooked objects that once filled the hands and homes of people whose names are no longer spoken aloud. One of the first items recovered at a dig site in an old mining settlement was a small, corroded tin. Nearby, the glint of sunlight on glass led to the discovery of several shards, green-tinted and smooth-edged with time. When pieced together, they formed part of a square bottle, likely once filled with medicinal tonic or alcohol. In settlements where injury was common and isolation intense, such bottles were more than mere refuse. They represented solace, treatment, sometimes escape. The glass bears the gentle frost of decades underground, its sharpness dulled, its clarity clouded. But it still tells its story. Perhaps the most evocative find lay deeper, embedded in compacted clay. The remains of a wooden sluice box. Scattered not far from the sluice were pottery fragments, coarse earthenware, some glazed in dull browns and greens, and then, lodged at the edge of a waterlogged trench, was a single miner's tool, a pickaxe head, heavy and worn, half sunk in mud. Each of these artifacts, though modest, is part of a larger conversation. The land itself acts as both storyteller and guardian. Over time, layers of soil settled gently over what is left behind. Even the position of objects within the earth tells a story. The deeper I find, the older its origin. To walk through such a site, even years after excavation, is to feel a subtle shift in presence. Imagine stepping carefully along a creek bed where the sluice once ran, the soil damp and rich with silt. In these remnants, rusted, broken, half lost, there is a kind of grace, and the landscape, ever patient, has kept their stories. There's a moment subtle, but unforgettable, when you realize that the ground beneath you is layered not just with soil, but with memory. You stand where others once stood. The same wind that brushes your face once tugged at a miner's coat. The same rain that softens the earth once filled their boots with mud. These connections, fleeting and fragile, are what draws so many to places like these, where history isn't distant or abstract, but close enough to touch. Even in silence, the landscape speaks. It may be a depression in the earth where a cabin once stood, the faint line of a collapsed fence, or the unnatural mound of tailings from a mining operation long since closed. The earth absorbs what we leave behind, transforms it, and offers it back as witness. And hands still dusty, there's a feeling not of departure, but of having listened to something important. You've heard, in quiet ways, the stories that endure, not in books or records, but in objects. The landscape itself becomes a storyteller, and the more you pay attention, the more you hear. It keeps the tin flattened beneath a tree root. It cradles the pottery fragment in a bank of clay, listening to rust, to clay, to splinters of glass and wood. listening to the land. Every artifact, no matter how small or broken, is a bridge, a way of reaching across time and touching something real. A reminder that we walk atop layers of life, that every step is taken on ground thick with history, and that beneath our feet, the past still breathes. It holds the tool just where it fell, decades ago, into thick, unwilling mud. Time doesn't erase, it enfolds. And sometimes, generously, it reveals. It was a midday communal dump, once positioned at the edge of the settlement. To modernize, just a pile of old trash, but to archaeologists, it's a treasure trove. What people throw away can say more about them than what they choose to keep. Within that jumble of discards were signs of diet, of hardship, and of occasional indulgence. A small imported bottle that once held jam, its ornate label still partly legible under glass. These features, often overlooked by casual observers, form a kind of grammar, the landscape's own way of telling its story. Why? Was it a gift, or a stolen taste of something better? These are questions the object can't fully answer, but they spark curiosity, empathy, imagination. That's what archaeology offers. Not complete stories, but starting points. A gesture toward lives, once fully lived, at one site, now overgrown with sedge and blackberry. A shallow pit was found filled with broken crockery, food bones, and rusted tin cans. You realize, holding a chipped mug or a child's marble from a long-abandoned home, that the past wasn't made up of wars and treaties and leaders. It was made up of people. Tired, hopeful, stubborn people. Eating meals, scraping by, sharing jokes, missing home. The presence of such an item, something luxurious, unnecessary, and expensive, raises questions. Who bought it? The emotional power of these discoveries isn't in their rarity. It's in their intimacy. And perhaps what lingers most strongly is the sense of continuity that the land does not forget. As you walk away from such a site, shoes damp with dew in the end. Archaeology is less about digging things up than it is about listening. There is a quiet reverence that settles in when you spend enough time in places where lives were once built and then slowly forgotten. To walk the ground of a vanished settlement is to move through the echoes of untold stories. Nothing remains of the structure above ground. No timbers, no chimney. Just a faint square impression in the grass, and a line of darker soil marking where the walls once were. But then you kneel, brush aside leaves, and there in the soil is the base of a clay pipe, its bowl chipped, its stem broken. There are no golden idols or lost palaces here, just the stuff of daily survival. And that is what makes them so profound, because for every monument etched into textbooks, there are thousands of places like this, quiet, remote, and rich with the kinds of histories that speak most directly to the human experience. Nearby, a square nail, and the corner of a boot heel, half consumed by rot. Who boiled stew in the cracked pot, scraping the bottom for one more meal before payday? They are translating the language of the land, allowing it to speak again. The people whose belongings were unearthed are no longer voiceless. They speak through what they left behind. Not in paragraphs, but in fragments, and we in turn become caretakers of their memory. Each item catalogued, drawn, and preserved as a note in a larger symphony. Not to observe it as an outsider, but to feel the weight of it, to move through its layers, not just physically, but emotionally. It's a quiet kind of awe. Not the kind that demands spectacle, but the kind that grows slowly, with each broken bottle, each bent nail, each story held in the land. Some are loud and clear, the sluice box with its rusted iron pins, the preserved timbers waterlogged, but intact. Others are fleeting, a fingernail-sized pottery shard with a pattern barely visible, a worn brass button with a single thread still clinging to it. Who lost a pickaxe in the mud? A careless mistake, or a sudden storm that flooded the works? These questions don't have answers, but they do have weight, and in asking them, we connect ourselves to those who came before, not just intellectually, but emotionally. A sense that every place has a memory, and every memory waits, patiently, to be found. Each item is minor, but together they form a picture. A man smoking by the fire after a day's work, removing his boots, perhaps patching a broken wall with salvaged nails. In gullies now overgrown with ferns and brambles, you can still trace the unnatural straightness of ditches dug by hand. Hillsides, subtly reshaped, hint at long-abandoned tailings, piled. Even the plants tell part of the story. No native herbs, brought for cooking or medicine, sometimes persist long after buildings crumble. A patch of mint by a stream, far from any current habitation, might mark the site of a kitchen garden, tended long ago by someone who missed the tastes of home. It is a life not recorded in any census or document. And yet, here it is. Solid, quiet, real, and when we leave, whether by choice, by hardship, or by slow erosion of time, the land slowly reclaims what we left. The silence is not empty. It's full of the breath of those who once stood there, who laughed and worked and swore and sang. You feel it beneath your feet, in the soft give of mossy soil, in the crunch of gravel that once lined a path. The past is not gone, it is just resting, and every artifact is a gentle prod, a whisper saying, "We were here, we mattered." But it does not erase, it enfolds, and it remembers. The soil is thick with memory, not the kind found in archives or libraries, but the deeper, more tactile memory of things left behind. Every object drawn from the earth, every depression in the ground or unusual stone alignment, carries with it the weight of the people who once stood there. It took days of careful brushing and sifting to determine its purpose. A blacksmith's hearth, perhaps used for only a few seasons, then abandoned. Among the ash, a bent horseshoe and a half-used clump of iron nails. The remnants of a trade once practiced in the open air. You can almost hear the hammer ringing, see the flicker of orange light, the sparks bursting into the cold morning mist. The hearth is long extinguished, but its warmth lingers in the imagination. These are the stories that don't shout. They murmur, they linger, they wait. Take the simple act of standing at the edge of what was once a miner's hut. The soil preserves not just artifacts, but time itself. Stratigraphy, the layering of sediments, acts like the pages of a diary written by the land. The uppermost layers, disturbed by roots and rain, hold the most recent traces. Dig deeper, and you move backward. A layer of ash might tell of a fire that swept through. A compacted floor of clay and gravel might mark a well-used pathway. The deeper the excavation, the more the land reveals, each layer bringing the archaeologist closer to the heartbeat of those who came before. At one dig, a narrow trench revealed a compacted layer of charcoal mixed with scorched bone and slag. These aren't grand discoveries. You find yourself wondering, who built the sluice box? Plank by plank, measuring angles by eye and hammering boards into place with calloused hands. The landscape, too, carries its own scars and signs. There's a deeply human impulse to anchor ourselves in place. We build, we bury, we plant. To walk these sites is not to trespass, but to bear witness. As archaeologists unearth these pieces, gently, reverently, they are not just reconstructing history. And even when the dig ends, when the tools are packed up and the trench refilled, the site continues to live in the imagination. This is what it means to walk through a landscape shaped by history. And when you leave, brushing soil from your boots, sunlight warm on your back, you carry something with you. Not an artifact, but an understanding, a connection. To engage with the past through the landscape is to accept that we are not the first, nor will we be the last. To walk these paths, this ground beneath our feet has been trodden by hope and hardship, by nameless hands and stories we can only glimpse. It's reaching across time, in search of relationship. It asks us to recognize what endures and what disappears and to hold both in equal regard. These simple fragments, though broken, are not noise. They are notes in a long, unbroken melody. Each artifact unearthed a rusted tin, a broken tool. The vanished glimmer of glass beckons. Ask not just to wonder. There, you find people who worked as hard as any in our time, who lived in isolation and hardship. A rusted hinge in an erratic rock wall becomes a clue. The earth becomes a living archive. Each step becomes an act of reading, of witnessing, of caring. A moss-lined depression might be a buried cellar. In fields long reclaimed, faint furrows betray former garden plots. We are participants in an ongoing narrative, one that stretches before us and behind us. The land keeps memory, not in straight lines, but in spirals again and again, offering us traces and asking us to pay attention. Yet the needle miraculously still quivered to true north. Imagine the traveler who carried it, confident in its guidance. It helped plot courses through unknown terrain. These were signs of sudden disaster, perhaps a flare-up of violence, or a hunting accident, or a cabin fire that consumed both people and possessions. Without records, the precise truth may be lost, but the starkness of the scene tells us something essential, that lives were lived in full intensity, sometimes ending abruptly, often without and there it was again, lost not to spectacle, but to a moment of oversight. A rainstorm washes patterns into a trench. Roots keep reboring shards. Moss creeps over and then time did that. The land shape-shifted, vegetation grew, water flowed. But still, the artifacts abide. They are resilient, but they are also vulnerable. The decision to leave them in place, to protect them, to tell their stories, this is where we, today, either honor or erase them. It changes the heights we scale, the houses we build, the values we honor, and in that process, it preserves. The change becomes a kind of keeper. To listen is to recognize that, in the deep quiet underfoot, the past still breathes and offers its hand. Pause, breathe, listen. Because those fragments are not broken, they are bridges, and through them, we may yet remember who we were and who we might become. Among the stones that lined the waterhole lay a chipped enamelware cup and a weathered notebook whose pages were gone, but whose binding stitched leather mind wrapped around nothing. The cup suggests a morning ritual. Cupped hands around hot liquid, drink taken slowly. To hold a child's shoe, a pickaxe head, a fragment of glass, a hinge, a platter's rimist to cross a threshold of time and touch another soul, not as abstract memory, not objects, but awareness. Continuity. The sense that life is made of small things, that every generation is both heir and ancestor, that the ground beneath us is thick with voices yet unheard and waiting. These were people who felt the ache of cold mornings, who whispered prayers, who whispered to each other, who fell silent when a baby cried, and from their objects we hear echoes. That legacy is held not in archive shelves, but in the patterns left by simple acts. Mending a shoe, digging a ditch, boiling stew, mapping ground, holding a compass, say goodbye. The notebook hints at plans, perhaps lines of poetry, calculations for the well's depth, names. Absent the words, all we are left with are possibilities and the invitation to imagine, but recovered, for us to hold and to imagine the path that brought it there. The tin can rusts and warps, but still recalls its shape. A wooden board twists with rot, but preserves its grain. Glass, clouded with age, yet lights up in the sun, and it is this mosaic that humanizes history, that makes the past visceral, that reminds us of the bones underneath the gloss of monuments. A farmland slated for development might contain dozens of unrecorded sites. Foundations, wells, dumps. Without careful investigation, those stories disappear. But to excavate with care is not to stop progress, it is to anchor it in context, to build with memory in mind. For every castle, there were those who cracked pots over fires. For every famous battle, there were families sweeping floors and sending children off to school, unaware of world events. In these humble remains lies the pulse of lived experience. And long after the people who shaped these objects are gone, part of them remains, embedded in earth and memory. Even the vegetation speaks, and the presence of imported herbs like mint, thyme, or lavender in a wild stream bank hints at longer kitchen gardens tended with care, but who still carved out spaces for family, for comfort, for hope. They left behind more broken things than intact ones, more questions than answers, and yet they mattered. Their mark endures, thick-soled, reinforced with thumbnail-sized nails, mended again and again, until its shape barely held. It lay under a shattered plank, long since succumbed to rot. Each unearthed artifact is a fragment of conversation between past and present, between permanence and decay, between land and life. This is not just about preserving objects. It is about preserving the human experience behind them. The next time you walk on uneven soil and feel metal underfoot, pause, pick it up, brush it clean, and listen. Every tin can we leave, every broken tile we discard, every forgotten foundation we cover over becomes part of the story. We are storytellers by default, whether we intend to be or not. To cradle such an artifact is to cradle the life that shaped it, to honor care, struggle, and the profound resilience of those who lived there. Beside it, tufts of worn fabric hinted at its former owner. There was no matching pair, no name stitched inside, no grave or census record to give context, just this little shoe, poignant in its vulnerability, and its testament that a child once toddled through that rugged place, a family lived in hope there. But to remember, every life leaves an imprint, and the earth we inherit is spoken for, shaped by countless invisible voices. The responsibility this reveals shifts something within us. Archaeology, at its deepest, is not merely extraction, taking artifacts from the dirt and placing them in display cases. One of the most moving discoveries from a remote mining camp was something so small it could easily have been overlooked. Holding that shoe, you feel the weight of ethical memory. That responsibility extends endlessly forward. The choices we make today, what we build, what we abandon, what we preserve, will become the layers from which future archaeologists piece together who we were. Walking these sites and truly listening to them cultivates humility. After such encounters, you'd begin to see the landscape differently. Silence transforms, too. It's no longer absence. It's layered to be read, listened to, honored. That continuity, that awareness of walking through a living story, is deeply comforting. Thus, these landscapes evolve into places sacred in a quiet, everyday sense of consecration, not by grand design but by human presence. And though they don't demand reverence, they ask for attention, for care, for presence. There was a surveyor's compass discovered once, nestled in deep clay. Its brass casing was pitted, its glass face splintered. Another dig revealed a mass of blackened bone, calcined and brittle, a handful of old shotgun pellets, and the remains of an iron skillet. In a distant salt flat, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a well-digging team's camp. Artifacts of sleep and food, of work and ritual, form a quiet mosaic of daily life. This perspective shapes how we treat the world today. It softens destruction, elevates conservation. In turning earth and discovering these traces, archaeologists sift, not just soil, but meaning. To encounter a site is to embrace complexity, the blend of human agency and natural force. Perhaps the truest reward of archaeological listening is empathy. Walking away from such places, boot dusty, gloves stained, heart full, but you also know you have carried something away. To walk ignorant of that is to wander blind, but to walk with attentiveness is to belong, however briefly, to a story larger than ourselves. And maybe that is the final lesson the earth has to teach. That memory has weight, not marble, but soil, not stone tablets, but scraps of tin and clay. We inherit the ground, and through it, the myriad lives, it enfolds. To tread it is to hear its stories. Pause next time the earth grants you a fragment of that breath, a shard of glass, a twisted nail, a child's shoe tattered with time. The past does not speak in declarations. It whispers, it waits. A splinter of pottery, its glaze faded by time. A child's leather shoe, cracked and curled in upon itself. At first glance, they seem small, forgotten, worthless. But those who know how to read the land, historians, caretakers of memory, know that these fragments are everything. They are pieces of lives once lived, gestures frozen in time, quiet testaments to all that has come before. And sometimes, when we listen carefully enough, it begins to speak. We began this journey in the soil, with simple things, a rusted tin, half buried in mud. What we leave behind is not always grand. It is to bear witness. You are not an intruder. You are a listener. Every crunch beneath your boots, every soft depression in the grass, every object uncovered by gentle or careful hands is an invitation, not in sweeping events or monuments alone, but in footsteps pressed into the earth, in laughter shared over a simple meal, in the scrape of tools and the hush of bedtime fires. It is not always beautiful. A piece of something once whole, a window into the daily rhythms of someone's world. They carry the weight of human experience, the mundane and the meaningful, the repetitive tasks, the moments of pause, the hopes that bloomed quietly at the edges of toil, the woman who stirred beans in a cracked pot, humming as children played nearby, the man who lost a tool in the mud, perhaps only realizing it days later, unable to find it again. These are not grand stories. In their care, their imperfection, they show us that we are part of something much longer, much deeper, a continuity of living, of striving, of belonging to place. People who drank coffee from chipped mugs, who wrote letters by candlelight, who tucked children into bed and worried about the cold. People whose names are lost, but whose lives were full. It is the act of paying attention, of wondering, what happened here? Who was here before me? What did they feel, want, fear, dream? They are not inscribed in history books, but they are no less worthy of memory. A keeper, a witness. We begin to ask ourselves what we will leave behind. It's about what we choose to see, what we choose to value, what we choose to carry forward. What traces of our lives will remain in the soil? Will they read dignity in our waste? Will they wonder at what we built, or grieve for what we destroyed? What stories will one day be told from the fragments of our now? Listen for the stories held by the landscape. They are not loud, they do not demand, but they are waiting. We must shift our gaze from the grand to the granular, from the documented to the buried, from the loud to the quiet. Every path we pave, every tool we drop, every garden we plant becomes part of the record, and whether we intend it or not, we will be remembered by what we leave behind, layered in soil and ash and clay, protected by time, transformed by it, but never erased. A row of trees growing strangely straight might once have lined a fence or road. Just moss, just silence, just an old hinge poking from the earth like a memory refusing to be buried. A patch of mint growing wildly in a clearing was perhaps once someone's garden, tended carefully each morning, the scent of it rising in steam as water boiled on the stove. Not in ink, but in rust, in ash, in bone, in footsteps, in absence, in the pause between bird calls on a still morning. The story is there, but it is real, and the earth of her patient holds it close. Wood warps, but its grain remains, and in that quiet preservation, we find something extraordinary. The past, breathing gently beneath the present. A cracked cup used for morning tea. A pickaxe lost in mud as floodwaters rose. These objects carry more than their shapes. To uncover such things is to remember that history was never abstract. It was lived, moment by moment, breath by breath. You begin to see the land differently after such an encounter. A dip in the field is no longer just erosion. It may be a collapsed cellar or the buried outline of a home. And under your feet, always under your feet, are the stories. The land does not forget. It preserves, not out of intent, but out of nature. Road slows in still air. Metal rusts, but does not vanish. To walk across such a place, an abandoned mining camp, a sunken foundation hidden under nettle and moss, is not to trespass, an invitation to remember. Because every object, no matter how small, is a story. Think of the miner who hammered a sluice box together out of scavenged boards. The past, we often forget, is made up of ordinary people doing ordinary things. Working, building, hoping, failing, trying again. And that is what these fragments reveal. Not relics of a lost world, but reflections of our own. We recognize ourselves in them, but in order to hear these stories, we must slow down. Archaeology is not just the work of professionals with brushes and shovels. To walk through a landscape with these questions is to let it speak, and when it speaks, it often says more than we expected. There is a kind of reverence that emerges from this process, a sense of walking in sacred ground, though there are no signs or shrines. This reverence is not religious, it is human. It's the reverence of standing where others once stood, not kings or generals, but people like you. To uncover what they left behind is to meet them, briefly, across the arc of time, and in that meeting, we are changed. We see the land not just as ground to be owned, used, or developed, but as a vessel, because we, too, are becoming history. Will those who come after us find care in what we preserved? This is the gift and the burden of being aware. We shape the future's memory of us by how we treat the past, and how we treat the land that holds it. And so this story, this long, slow, quiet story, is not only about what has been found, because the ground beneath our feet is not blank. It is written on, deeply, and now, you are part of it. So, when you walk again, through a forest path, across a meadow, past an old foundation hidden by ivy, waiting in the glint of glass beneath a leaf, in the warped iron under moss, in the cold curve of a bottle left behind, these are not just broken things. They are bridges. Bridges between then and now, between those who came before and those still to come, between the land and the lives it remembers. We are not alone. We never were. And perhaps that is the quiet truth beneath all discovery, that the past is not really behind us. It moves through the wind in the grass, the whisper of the creek, the rustle of leaves through foundations now long vanished. It lives in the spaces where walls once stood. It hums in the soil under our homes. It waits in the creak of a gate no longer attached to any fence. And the land is patient, remembering land holds it all, not to keep it from us, but to offer it, to say, look, they were here, and they mattered. So what do we do with this knowledge? We slow down, we look closely, we speak softly when we walk where others have walked, we preserve when we can, we document what we notice, we tell the stories we find however partial, however small, because, in telling them, we restore dignity. even to the forgotten, especially to the forgotten, and we ask new questions. How will we be remembered? What will the land one day say about us? What fragments will remain not just of our tools and our cities, but of our kindness, our stewardship, our care? Because just as we inherit this ground from those who came before, so to do we shape the ground that future hands will touch. And in that cycle, in that long chain of presence and absence, labor and rest, silence and memory, there is beauty. Not the kind of beauty that fades with fashion or spectacle, but the kind that endures in rust, en route in the curve of a cup, in the footprint left behind in stone. This is not the end of the story. This is only the moment where you join it, where the listener becomes the caretaker, where the viewer becomes part of the lineage. So walk gently, ask generously, listen deeply, because this land remembers, and now so do you.